Prologue, the whispers of blood and shadow. The world knew of vampires, creatures of the night, ancient and powerful. Their legends, whispered in hushed tones across the shadowed valleys and mist-shrouded peaks of Central Europe, spoke of their immortality, their insatiable thirst for blood, and their chilling, almost hypnotic allure. They were the apex predators of the supernatural world, beings of immense strength and cunning, their existence woven into the very fabric of human folklore and fear. But few knew of the half-breeds, or as they called themselves, the hybrids. They were the impossible children, born from human mothers who, against all odds and defying every known law of nature, miraculously survived the brutal, often fatal, union with a vampire. Their creation was not an act of gentle conception, but a desperate gamble, a brutal lottery where the vast majority of mothers perished in the agonizing process of giving birth, their life force consumed by the very act of creating something new. Only a handful of these extraordinary children, infused with a unique, potent blend of human vitality and vampire essence, ever drew breath. Each hybrid birth was a miracle, a testament to a mother's unimaginable resilience, a defiance of death itself, and a stark reminder of the immense, often tragic, cost. Unlike their vampire progenitors, hybrids didn't need to hunt for blood to survive. Their vitality stemmed from a different, purer source, a unique blend of human warmth and supernatural essence that pulsed through their veins. They possessed an even greater strength, a blinding speed that could outpace any pure-blooded vampire, a blur of motion that left even the fastest of the undead far behind. Their senses were impossibly sharp. They could hear a heartbeat from across a crowded square, discern the subtle shift of air before a storm, or taste the fear in the very atmosphere, a metallic tang on their tongue. Yet their greatest gift was also their most dangerous curse. They could blend seamlessly into human society. No telltale scent of ancient dust and blood, no icy touch that betrayed their true nature, no unnatural pallor that marked them as creatures of the night. Their skin was warm, their breath visible, their hearts beat a steady rhythm, albeit one stronger and faster than any human's. They were immortal, just like vampires, their lives stretching across centuries, their youth preserved indefinitely, but their existence was a constant shadow dance, a precarious tightrope walk between two worlds that sought their destruction. Vampires hunted them relentlessly, fearing what they couldn't control, what they couldn't understand, a new evolution, a potent blend that threatened their ancient order and their dominance. The hybrids, in turn, formed tight-knit groups, often hidden deep within forgotten forests or bustling cities, sworn to protect their dwindling kind, to survive and thrive in a world that wanted them extinct. They were a living paradox, a testament to both horror and hope, fighting for a future that might never come. Chapter 1. The Obsidian Throne. The ancient castle of Alessandro Visconti sat perched on the Carpathian Mountains like a crown of black stone. Its towers twisted up toward the starlit sky, and its walls had stood for centuries, keeping secrets that would make mortals tremble. Inside his study, Alessandro sat in his chair, a massive thing of carved oak that had once belonged to a king whose name history had forgotten. The room stretched up 3 stories high, packed with books from floor to ceiling. Some were so old their pages would crumble at a touch. Others held secrets in languages that no living human remembered. Through the tall window, he could see the village below. Tiny lights flickered like candles in the darkness, and smoke rose from chimneys where families gathered around their fires. The sight made him smile, not warmly, but with the distant amusement of someone watching ants build their hills. Another full moon, another batch of eager visitors, Silas said from the shadows near the fireplace. He stepped forward, polishing a silver chalice until it gleamed. Still playing the charming host, I see. Alessandro's pale features remained calm. His dark eyes held the weight of 9 centuries, and his marble-white skin seemed to glow in the candlelight. They come seeking mysteries, Silas, power, wealth, the secret to eternal life, simple human desires. And you give them wine and pleasant conversation instead, Silas chuckled. His own pale face cracked into a grin. How generous of you! From the ballroom 3 floors below, the sound of laughter drifted up. Tonight's guests were the usual crowd, minor nobles, wealthy merchants, a few scholars hoping to access Alessandro's legendary library. They had no idea what their host truly was. "Lord Visconti," they would say, "you look exactly as you did when my grandfather knew you 50 years ago. What's your secret?" And Alessandro would smile and deflect. "Good wine and mountain air," he'd say. "Amazing what clean living can do." Of course, it wasn't that simple. Every few decades, when the questions became too persistent, when the whispers grew too loud, Alessandro would take more direct action. A touch to the forehead, a whisper of ancient power, and suddenly the villagers would remember a different story entirely. Oh, Lord Visconti. His family has always lived in that castle. His grandfather looked just like him, and his great-grandfather before that. Memory was such a fragile thing in mortal minds. So easy to reshape, to rewrite. Alessandro had become quite artistic about it over the centuries. "You're thinking about the memory work again," Silas observed. "I can tell by that look." "The baker's son has been asking questions," Alessandro said simply. "Apparently, he found some old drawings in his family's attic, sketches of me from his great-great-grandmother's time, identical to how I look now." "Ah," Silas set down his chalice. "How inconvenient." "I'll handle it tomorrow night. A simple adjustment, he'll remember finding drawings of my ancestor instead. Problem solved." Alessandro took a sip from his crystal goblet. The wine was older than most countries, rich and complex. But even perfect wine couldn't fill the emptiness that had settled in his chest centuries ago. His thoughts drifted, as they sometimes did, to Isabella. "You're thinking about her again," Silas said quietly. "I'm thinking about many things." "Alessandro," Silas's voice held 8 centuries of friendship. "She's been gone for 300 years, even if she returned." "She won't." Alessandro's tone was final. "And even if she did, I'm not the same man who loved her so recklessly. I've learned the value of control, of distance, of safety." The laughter from below grew louder, more forced. Someone was trying too hard to impress. Alessandro's enhanced hearing picked up fragments of conversation. "A mysterious Lord Visconti. Never ages. They say he has a portrait in his attic, like something out of a Gothic novel." Alessandro's jaw tightened. Perhaps he'd been too lenient lately. Maybe it was time for a more thorough memory cleansing of the entire region. "Silas," he said, standing gracefully, "send word to Sophia. Have our guests escorted to their carriages. The evening has lost its charm." "Of course," Silas bowed slightly. "Shall I tell them you've taken ill?" "Tell them I have urgent business to attend to. Family matters." Alessandro's smile was sharp as a blade. After all, family is so important, even when they've been dead for centuries. As Silas glided away to fulfill his orders, Alessandro remained at his window. The village below looked so peaceful, so innocent. The humans went about their simple lives, never knowing that their memories were as changeable as the weather, as malleable as clay in the hands of someone who knew how to shape them. He'd been kind, really. He could have simply killed anyone who grew too curious. Instead, he gave them better stories, happier endings, lives free from the terror of knowing what truly lurked in the shadows of their world. The wind howled through the mountain passes, and Alessandro closed his eyes. Tomorrow night, he would visit the baker's son. A gentle touch, a whispered suggestion, and the boy would remember finding old family portraits instead of impossible evidence of immortality. It was almost too easy. But then, humans had always been fragile creatures. Their minds, their memories, their lives, all so brief, so easily broken, so simple to rewrite. Alessandro Visconti, master of memory and shadow, turned away from the window and settled back into his chair. The night was still young, and he had eternity to fill. Chapter 2, The Silver Blade. The Transylvanian wilderness, a sprawling tapestry of ancient, gnarled trees and shadowed valleys, was Ingrid Halvorson's domain. Tonight, the moon, a sliver of silver in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the whispering wind. Ingrid moved through it like a whisper herself, a phantom among the rustling leaves, her tall, athletic frame clad in dark, supple leather that blended seamlessly with the deep shadows. Her light blonde curls, usually a wild halo around her face, were pulled back tightly in a practical braid, secured at the nape of her neck, ready for the hunt. Every muscle in her body was coiled, alert, a testament to years of rigorous training and countless life-or-death encounters. Her senses, sharper than any human's, honed to an exquisite edge by years of survival, picked up the faint, metallic tang of vampire on the wind, a cloying sweetness mixed with the terrified, coppery scent of fresh human blood. It was a familiar, sickening cocktail that always tightened her gut. "He's close," she murmured into her wrist calm, her voice low and urgent, barely disturbing the stillness of the night. The calm was a crude, but effective, piece of hybrid technology, designed to be undetectable by vampire senses. "Stay sharp, Ingrid," Cale's voice crackled back through the calm, laced with his usual gruff protectiveness. He was her partner, her brother-in-arms, a fellow hybrid with a scarred face and eyes that held the same weary determination as her own. "This one's been sloppy. Left a trail a blind man could follow. Don't let him catch you off guard. He's desperate, and desperate vampires are the most dangerous. They'll lash out at anything." Ingrid acknowledged him with a silent nod, though he couldn't see it. She quickened her pace, her boots silent on the forest floor, her heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm that was both human and something more. The scent of fear grew stronger, leading her to a small clearing bathed in the eerie moonlight. There, a rogue vampire, young and clumsy by the scent of him, was cornering a young woman. His fangs, long and grotesque, glinted obscenely in the pale light, and his eyes glowed with an uncontrolled hunger. The human girl was frozen in terror, her eyes wide with primal fear, her silent scream almost audible to Ingrid's acute hearing. The vampire, driven by a raw, unrefined thirst, was clumsy, his movements jerky, lacking the ancient grace of older bloodlines. With a blur of motion that even a pure-blooded vampire would struggle to follow, Ingrid was there. One moment she was a shadow among the trees, the next she was a formidable presence in the clearing, a silver blade flashing in her hand, catching the moonlight like a beacon. The fight was swift, brutal, and utterly decisive. Ingrid moved with a fluid grace that belied her immense strength, anticipating the vampire's every clumsy lunge, striking with precision born of countless similar encounters. He snarled, a guttural sound, lunging with surprising speed, but she sidestepped, her blade a silver arc. She disarmed him with a swift, practiced flick of her wrist, sending his clawed hand scraping uselessly through the air. Then, with a single, practiced thrust, she plunged the blade into his heart. The vampire stiffened, a choked gasp escaping his lips, before he crumbled to dust, a faint hiss of dissipation in the night air, a puff of acrid smoke the only remaining evidence of his monstrous existence. The air instantly felt lighter, cleaner. Ingrid turned to the trembling human who had collapsed to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. "You're safe now," Ingrid said, her voice firm but gentle, a stark contrast to the ferocity she had just displayed. She knelt, checking the girl for injuries, her touch surprisingly soft. "Go and tell no one what you saw. Forget this place. It was a nightmare, a bad dream." She watched the girl scramble away, her heart aching with the familiar weight of their hidden war, the constant need to protect, to erase, to remain unseen. It was a lonely existence, but a necessary one. Later, back in their hidden, rustic haven, a series of interconnected caves and camouflaged shelters nestled deep within a forgotten valley, far from human eyes and vampire patrols, Lena, a younger hybrid with wide, hopeful eyes, looked at Ingrid with awe. Lena was barely a century old, still finding her place in their dangerous world. "You were amazing, Ingrid. Another one down. That's 3 this month." Lena's youthful enthusiasm was a rare spark of light in their often grim existence, a reminder of what they were fighting for. Astrid, their elder and mentor, a woman whose eyes held the wisdom of centuries and whose silver hair was braided with intricate beads, placed a hand on Ingrid's shoulder. Astrid rarely smiled, but her presence was a comforting anchor. "Every victory is a breath of life for our kind," she said, her voice a soft rumble, like distant thunder, carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. "But the shadows grow longer. The vampires are restless, their ancient feuds intensifying and other threats stir, threats that see no difference between us and them. The balance is shifting. Be vigilant. Always. Ingrid nodded, the weight of Astrid's words settling deep within her. She felt the truth of them in her bones. The fight was far from over, and the feeling of impending doom, a cold premonition, was a constant companion. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was just the beginning of a much larger, darker conflict. The rogue vampire she had just dispatched was merely a symptom, a small piece of a much grander, more dangerous game. She could feel it in the air, a tension that hummed beneath the surface of the world. Chapter 3. The Unseen Trap. The rogue vampire Ingrid had dispatched, a reckless, impulsive creature named Marius, was part of a small, disorganized coven known for their blatant disregard of ancient vampire laws and their penchant for drawing unwanted attention. Their carelessness was a danger to everyone, human and supernatural alike, threatening to expose the hidden world. Her investigation, following the faint, unique scent of Marius's sire, a scent that grew stronger and more ancient, more powerful, almost cloying with each passing hour, led her deeper into the heart of the Carpathian Mountains, closer to the ancient, forbidden lands of Alessandro Visconti. The air grew colder, heavier, filled with an ancient, almost oppressive power she couldn't quite place, a sense of immense age and authority that seemed to press down on the very atmosphere, making her skin prickle. The trees grew denser, older, their branches gnarled and twisted like the limbs of sleeping giants, forming a canopy so thick that only slivers of moonlight pierced through, creating an eerie, dappled gloom. The silence here was different, deeper, more profound than any she had known, a silence that hummed with unseen life and ancient secrets. Marius had been a walking disaster. His blatant disregard for the ancient vampire laws had risked exposing the hidden world, putting both humans and supernaturals in danger. His careless feeding and erratic behavior had left a trail of blood and whispers across villages, a trail that Ingrid could not ignore. It wasn't the kill that unsettled her, it was the mystery that followed. Vampires didn't behave that way, not without consequences. Marius's actions had been loud, messy, leaving behind terrified villagers, mutilated bodies, and whispers of monsters in the dark. It was reckless in a way that bordered on suicidal. Ingrid had followed the trail not just to tie off loose ends, but to understand why. Why would a vampire so young, so obviously undisciplined, be allowed to roam freely in such a sensitive area? The deeper she moved into the region, the more certain she became. This was old land, ancient land, thick with the weight of power and memory. The forest itself seemed to breathe with something ancient. There was only one vampire with a claim to this territory, one whose dominion over this part of the Carpathians had been uncontested for centuries. Alessandro Visconti. The name carried weight, like a tolling bell in a crypt. One of the oldest vampire lords still walking the earth, feared, respected, bound by ancient codes that demanded discretion, order, secrecy. A creature of such immense discipline and control that the idea of his progeny acting out so carelessly made no sense. Either Alessandro had lost control of his own, or something far stranger was at play. As she ventured deeper into the Carpathian Mountains, that scent, ancient and suffocating in its potency, grew stronger. The land itself seemed to shift with her approach. The air turned heavy and cold, filled with a quiet power that made her skin prickle. The trees were older here, twisted and vast, their limbs like the fingers of sleeping gods. The moonlight barely pierced the dense canopy above, leaving the forest bathed in eerie half-light. Eventually, she reached the outskirts of Alessandro's estate, a fortress carved from shadow and stone. Its dark towers pierced the sky like claws, and the very sight of it stirred something instinctual inside her, awe and a trace of fear. The outer gardens were sculpted with an obsessive precision, but the deeper she moved, the wilder it became, rose vines thick with thorns, their blooms dark and heavy, the scent of earth and ancient magic clinging to every breath. As she stepped into a particularly overgrown section, the world seemed to hold its breath. The night sounds stopped, the breeze died, silence pressed in from all sides. She didn't see the strike, just a ripple in the air and then impact. A crushing blow hurled her against a twisted oak. Pain flared through her side. She spun to defend, but before she could fully rise, shadowy figures closed in. Alessandro's coven, she realized instantly. Swift, practiced, deadly. They surrounded her in a blur, their eyes sharp and cold, strength overwhelming. Then, from the darkest part of the grove, he emerged. Alessandro Visconti. His presence was like a storm held in human form, contained, coiled, vast. The moonlight barely touched him, but his eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, reflecting centuries of rule. He studied her with stillness, like a scholar examining something unknown. "You trespass," he said, his voice low and resonant, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. "And you have spilled the blood of my progeny. Marius was a disgrace, yes, but he was mine." There was no anger, only finality. And yet, beneath the surface, something unreadable flickered in his gaze. Ingrid stood, blood trickling from her side, defiance in her posture. "He was a threat to all of us," she said, steady. "I didn't know who he belonged to, but someone had to stop him. And now I want to know, why was he allowed to act like that? Why did a vampire sired by you become a danger to everything we've worked to protect?" Alessandro's thoughts churned with confusion and frustration. He couldn't understand who was behind the sudden surge of reckless feeding among his progeny, behavior that risked not only lives but his very position as leader. For months, his coven had been hunting and killing those who went rogue, yet the problem persisted. If it became known that he couldn't control his own, it would make him appear weak, inviting enemies to strike. He had planned to deal with Marius himself, but Ingrid's swift action arrived before he could. He did give her answer. His eyes remained on her, measuring, not with hostility, but with a cold, deliberate curiosity. From a high window, Sophia, his human steward, watched silently. Her expression unreadable, her hands clenched. A flicker of unease crossed her face as she watched the woman below, the hybrid who had dared to challenge a lord. Darkness crept in on Ingrid's consciousness, her vision narrowing as pain took hold. Chapter 4. A Prisoner's Fire. Ingrid awoke to a throbbing headache that pulsed behind her eyes, a dull, insistent ache intensifying with every beat of her heart. The biting cold of the stone chamber seeped into her bones, a damp chill permeating the very air, carrying the faint, metallic scent of iron and old, undisturbed earth. The room was utterly devoid of warmth, a stark contrast to the vibrant life that usually pulsed within her. The only light filtered through a high, barred window, a narrow slit in the thick wall, casting faint stripes across the rough-hewn stones and revealing the stark emptiness of the chamber. There was no comfort here, no straw on the floor, just the cold, hard flagstones beneath her. The only piece of furniture was a small, ancient wooden table set against one wall, stacked with dusty, leather-bound books whose titles were faded beyond recognition. Their presence suggested knowledge, secrets waiting to be uncovered, but for now, they were just silent witnesses to her captivity. Her wrists were bound, not by crude rope or iron manacles, but by strange, shimmering bonds that pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible energy, like woven moonlight. They felt cool against her skin, almost alive, and when she tried to pull against them, they seemed to tighten, absorbing her immense hybrid strength without a tremor, as if they were made of pure, unyielding force. She tested them again, muscles coiling and straining, the veins in her forearms bulging, but they held firm, unyielding, mocking her efforts. A frustrated growl rumbled in her chest, a low, animalistic sound of defiance. A heavy oak door, thick and ancient, studded with massive iron bands, creaked open, the sound echoing loudly in the oppressive silence of the dungeon, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Alessandro entered, his tall, imposing form silhouetted against the dimmer light of the corridor, an aura of ancient power preceding him like a silent herald. He moved with a predatory grace, his footsteps barely audible on the stone floor. He was followed by Silas, who carried a small, ornate lamp, its flame casting flickering shadows that danced across the stone walls, making the room seem to breathe with unseen entities, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. "You are a rare specimen," Alessandro mused, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the castle, a sound that carried the weight of centuries of command, a voice accustomed to absolute obedience. He circled her slowly, his gaze assessing, dissecting like a scientist examining a fascinating, dangerous anomaly. His dark eyes, fathomless pools of ancient knowledge, seemed to pierce through her, seeking the truth of her nature, stripping away her defenses, laying her bare. A hybrid. And you dared to trespass in my territory. His words were calm, yet held a chilling finality, a promise of retribution that sent a cold dread through her, despite her outward defiance. She met Alessandro's gaze unflinchingly, her blue eyes blazing with defiance, refusing to break eye contact, even as every instinct screamed at her to be cautious, to submit to this overwhelming power. Silas chuckled from the shadows, a dry, rattling sound like bones shifting in an ancient tomb. He leaned lazily against the doorframe, lips curling in a cruel, thin smile. Feisty, our lord has a taste for spirited ones, a welcome change from the usual terrified whimpers and desperate pleas we hear. Perhaps she'll prove entertaining. Alessandro ignored Silas, his dark eyes locked on Ingrid, searching, probing, trying to unravel the enigma before him. You show no fear, no remorse, a rare trait or a foolish one that may lead to your undoing. You understand I cannot simply let you walk free, do you not? Not just because you ended my progeny, but because you trespassed on my land. A grave offense, one that demands consequences. He tilted his head slightly, a subtle gesture that commanded silence and response. Ingrid's mind raced. She knew this well, there was no mercy here, no chance of escape. Yet she held her ground, voice steady and strong despite the fatigue and pain. I don't threaten you, Alessandro. Marius was reckless, a danger to us all, and his death was necessary. I came because careless feeding draws unwanted eyes, eyes that threaten all our kind. Maybe there are others like him, and maybe I need to find them before things get worse. She studied him carefully, weighing his expression. Her defiance wasn't meant to provoke, but to assert that she was neither naive nor broken. Alessandro's cold gaze flickered with something faintly like curiosity, a grudging respect even. He was measuring her, puzzling over this wild spirit who refused to bow. He leaned closer, voice low and almost conspiratorial. And yet, despite your words, you choose to enter a world bound by rules you refuse to acknowledge. Tell me, hybrid, what makes you think your reckless justice can change centuries of order? What drives you beyond vengeance and duty? Ingrid's thoughts sharpened. She knew better than to expect an easy answer, but something about his tone suggested a door opening, a door she might not have known was there. My purpose, she said quietly, is survival. Not just for me, but for all like me, caught between worlds that don't want us. I fight for a chance to live without fear, without hiding. She held his gaze until he withdrew, stepping back into the shadows, the faintest trace of a smile ghosting his lips, an expression she couldn't quite read. Chapter 5, The Serpent's Return. Days blurred into a monotonous cycle of tense interrogations and silent observations. Alessandro continued to visit Ingrid, not always to question, but sometimes simply to watch her, to gauge her reactions, to try and understand the anomaly before him. She remained defiant, her spirit unbroken, but a strange, unspoken understanding began to form between them, a recognition of each other's strength and resilience, a grudging respect that slowly chipped away at the walls between them. She had been released from the heavy magical shackle that once bound her wrists, but the thick stone walls of the chamber still sapped her strength, dampening her energy like a suffocating fog. Her movements felt sluggish, as if the very air conspired to hold her down. The wrist comm she had carried, a lifeline to her world, had long since died, its battery drained and useless. She knew escape was impossible. The castle was heavily guarded, and any attempt to flee would be met with swift and lethal force. Resigned, she remained where she was, locked in a silent battle of wills within these cold, unyielding walls. Ilara, a younger vampire with a more open demeanor, occasionally brought her food, a small plate of roasted meats and fresh bread, sometimes even a piece of fruit, her eyes reflecting a quiet curiosity, a hint of sympathy. You're different, Ilara once whispered, her voice soft before being called away by a stern-faced guard. Not like the others, not like the humans or even us. You have a light about you, a fierce one. Then, the castle seemed to hum with a new, vibrant, almost electric energy, a ripple of excitement and anticipation that spread through the ancient stones, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Servants moved with renewed purpose, their steps quicker, their faces alight with a mixture of apprehension and eagerness. The air grew thick with the scent of exotic perfumes and polished silver, a stark contrast to the usual scent of dust and old stone. A sleek black carriage, adorned with an intricate silver crest depicting a coiled serpent devouring its own tail, pulled up to the main entrance, its horses snorting impatiently, their breath pluming in the cool night air. The carriage doors swung open with a soft click, and from it emerged Isabella Morrow, a vision of dark elegance. Her gown, the color of midnight, flowed around her like liquid shadow, shimmering with every movement, catching the faint light from the torches that lined the grand entrance. Her dark, lustrous hair cascaded over her shoulders, framing a face of exquisite, predatory beauty, a beauty that had captivated kings and brought empires to their knees. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately scanned the grand hall for Alessandro. When she found him, her smile was a flash of white against her pale skin, a predatory, alluring curve, and her embrace was lingering, a clear statement of ownership, of a history that ran deep, a bond forged in centuries of shared power. Alessandro, Isabella purred, her voice like velvet, a silken whisper that nonetheless cut through the air, carrying a subtle, ancient power that commanded attention, drawing every eye in the hall. It has been far too long. Alessandro's initial reaction to Isabella's dramatic entrance was a carefully guarded stillness. It had been 3 centuries, 300 years since she had last stood before him, radiant and venomous. He remembered the beginning, when he had first met her, dazzling, enigmatic, and impossibly alluring. She had moved through courts and castles like a star fallen to earth, captivating powerful lords with a smile, commanding loyalty with a glance. And he, like so many others, had been ensnared. In those early days, he had begun to care for her truly. He believed her laughter was genuine, her touch sincere. But affection turned to suspicion, and then to revelation. The woman he had once imagined sharing eternity with had revealed herself to be something far colder and more dangerous. She wielded charm like a weapon, seducing not for love but for leverage. Her beauty was her banner, her alliances, temporary, her affections, calculated. Wherever she went, she left a trail of broken men, ruined reputations, and quietly vanished rivals. By the time he realized what she was, it was too late. He had already seen how far she would go for power, how effortlessly she could destroy lives to climb another rung in her silent war of influence. Their final confrontation had been brutal, a war of words, betrayal, and broken trust that had scarred him deeper than any blade. And yet now, here she stood again in his grand hall, unchanged, still as radiant, still as treacherous, a serpent in silk. Her presence reeked of unfinished games and dangerous intentions, filling the space with the same cloying, intoxicating power she had once used to blind him. "Isabella," Alessandro's voice was smooth, a practiced calm that betrayed nothing of the shock that rippled through him. He moved forward, offering her a hand, a gesture of formality, not warmth. As their fingers brushed, he felt the subtle shift in her aura. 3 centuries had not mellowed her, they had refined her. Her power, always formidable, felt darker, more absolute, like polished obsidian, cold and sharp. She had gained a certain weight, a chilling authority that went beyond mere age. It was a coldness that spoke of unspeakable acts, of a soul that had embraced the deepest shadows that had thrived on them. He had always seen himself as a being of control, of quiet power, a strategist. Isabella, he realized in that instant, had become something more akin to chaos, a force unbound, a tempest. The very air around her seemed to crackle with an untamed energy. Her eyes, those blue eyes that had once held so much light, so much passion, now seemed to glitter with an almost feral hunger, a predatory calculation that was entirely new, or at least far more pronounced. He saw hints of cruelty etched around their corners. This wasn't merely the Isabella of their youthful, tempestuous love. This was Isabella honed by darker desires, by a relentless, consuming pursuit of power for its own sake, a thirst that seemed to eclipse all else. He had been a collector of knowledge, a curator of his domain, his strength born of deep roots. She, he suspected, had become a conqueror, a destroyer, her strength derived from sweeping all before her. The scent of her, usually a rich, heady perfume, a blend of jasmine and dark woods, now carried an underlying metallic tang, a subtle hint of excessive consumption, of liberties taken. She was feeding heavily, carelessly, perhaps, or embracing a more brutal lifestyle, shedding any pretense of restraint. Isabella could not see Ingrid, locked away in a room somewhere in the castle, accessible to any who knew where to look, but that did not stop her from speaking with venom born of rumor and suspicion. "I hear tales of her," Isabella hissed, voice sharp as broken glass. "They say she reeks of the earth, raw and wild. A stain on your name, Alessandro. What madness is this, to shelter such a creature? Have you truly fallen so far as to invite that blight into your household?" Alessandro's jaw tightened. There was no shielding Ingrid here. The room was exposed to all who might enter, yet his resolve did not waver. "Isabella," he said, voice low but firm, a ripple of controlled power beneath each word. "These are matters of my house and my alliances. They do not concern your judgment." He gave no name, but the weight of his protection hung heavy between them, a silent warning. He saw the fire flickering in Isabella's gaze. This was no mere shadow from the past. It was a challenge, a threat to everything he was building, and to the fragile, unexpected bond forming between him and Ingrid. Chapter 6. Cracks in the Facade. Ingrid, despite her continued captivity, was a keen observer, her hybrid senses constantly taking in every detail of her surroundings, every subtle shift in the castle's atmosphere. She was a hunter by nature, and that instinct extended to understanding her captors, discerning patterns, identifying vulnerabilities. She noticed the subtle ways Alessandro interacted with Sophia, his human head of household, a quiet respect in his tone, a gentle command that lacked any hint of cruelty, far from the brutal dominance she expected from a vampire lord. Sophia, in turn, moved around him with an easy familiarity, a genuine affection in her eyes when she spoke of Alessandro, a loyalty that transcended fear, hinting at a bond deeper than mere master and servant, perhaps even a familial connection forged over decades of shared existence. Ingrid also saw Alara's genuine, almost childlike, fascination with human art, particularly the vibrant Renaissance paintings that adorned the few corridors she caught glimpses of during her brief, escorted walks. And how Alessandro, despite his ancient stoicism, indulged it, even explaining a piece's history with a rare, almost wistful tone, revealing a hidden depth to his character. He wasn't just a monster. He was a patron, a scholar, a being capable of appreciation beyond bloodlust, a creature of culture and intellect, burdened by endless time. These small glimpses, these unexpected deviations from her rigid perception of vampires as purely monstrous, chipped away at her defenses, creating tiny cracks in the formidable wall she had built around her heart, allowing slivers of doubt to seep in, challenging everything she thought she knew. One evening, Alessandro found her staring out the barred window of her cell, her gaze lost in the vast, melancholic expanse of the Carpathian Mountains, bathed in pale moonlight. A deep sadness settled in her eyes, a reflection of her longing for her people, her freedom, the simple warmth of her hidden haven, the camaraderie of her fellow hunters. "You miss your home," he stated, his voice softer than usual, a low murmur that seemed to carry on the night air, not a question, but an observation, surprisingly empathetic. He stood a respectful distance away beyond the enchanted boundary of the cage, his presence a powerful yet not overtly threatening force, his shadow long and imposing in the moonlight, a silent sentinel. Ingrid turned, her blonde curls catching the faint light, framing a face etched with quiet sorrow. "I miss my people. The simple fact of knowing I'm not alone in this world, that I have a purpose beyond just surviving. Something you wouldn't understand, being so ancient and alone, surrounded by relics. You have power, wealth, immortality. But what do you have that truly lives? What do you have that you truly care for beyond your own endless existence? Or are you just collecting?" Her words were sharp, a challenge, but laced with a genuine curiosity she couldn't hide, a desperate need to understand this creature who defied her every expectation. Alessandro's gaze softened further, a flicker of something akin to pain, a profound, ancient sorrow entering his eyes. It was a fleeting expression, quickly masked by centuries of practice, but Ingrid, with her heightened senses, caught it. A ripple in his otherwise impassive facade, a window into his hidden depths. You assume much, hybrid. Loneliness is a companion even to the immortal, perhaps especially to the immortal. To watch empires rise and fall, to see every face you cherish turn to dust, to outlive every connection, every fleeting joy, every fierce sorrow. It is a peculiar form of torment. A gilded cage, if you will, where the bars are made of time itself, and the only company is the echo of what once was. He didn't elaborate, didn't share specific memories, but the raw honesty in his voice resonated with her, echoing a similar ache in her own heart, a shared understanding of loss that transcended their species. A bond of shared immortality that was both a gift and a curse. He, in turn, observed her fierce protectiveness, the way her eyes darkened and her jaw clenched when she spoke of her kind's struggles. Her passion, her vibrant defiance, was a stark contrast to the jaded apathy that had dulled his existence. He found himself inexplicably drawn to her fire, to the very essence of her untamed spirit, a beacon in his long, shadowed eternity, a reminder of what it felt like to truly live. He felt a stir of something he hadn't felt in centuries, genuine curiosity, and perhaps something akin to hope, a faint, almost forgotten ember flickering back to life within his dead heart. The days following Isabella's visit were a tense ballet of veiled threats and simmering hostility. Isabella, accustomed to being the sole focus of Alessandro's attention, viewed Ingrid as a grotesque intrusion, a vulgar stain on the ancient purity of the castle. Her presence was a constant, predatory shadow. Her gray eyes tracked Ingrid's every movement with undisguised contempt. She would glide past the barred doorway of the cell in a mockery of grace, her silken gowns rustling like a serpent's scales, a faint, cloying scent of jasmine and something metallic, almost coppery, trailing in her wake. Her whispered words to Alessandro, just loud enough for Ingrid's enhanced hearing to catch, were laced with cutting remarks about Ingrid's common nature, her lack of grace, and the unfortunate scent of the earth that clung to her. Ingrid met Isabella's venom with a cool, unwavering gaze, refusing to be intimidated. Her hybrid fire burned brighter with each insult. She was a survivor, not a delicate flower to be crushed. One afternoon, when Alessandro was called away to inspect a newly unearthed manuscript in a sealed wing of the castle, Isabella seized her chance. The castle was unusually quiet, and the guards at Ingrid's door had mysteriously disappeared, dismissed, perhaps, by someone with authority. Ingrid sat cross-legged on the floor of her cell, flipping through a weathered volume of ancient maps, her fingers tracing the faded outline of the Carpathians, seeking familiar mountain passes, hoping to identify possible hybrid safe houses, small sanctuaries buried in myth and time. A sudden, unnatural chill crept into the cell, the air thinning, humming with danger. So the little stray finds comfort among books. Isabella's voice slithered through the bars, a purr soaked in contempt. She stepped into the faint light, her pale beauty warped by the malevolence curling at the edges of her smile. How quaint! Do you read of your pathetic kind's inevitable demise, hybrid? Or perhaps the folly of those who would betray their own blood for a fleeting fascination? Ingrid rose slowly, her hand instinctively going to the silver-laced dagger she kept hidden beneath her tunic, a gift from Astrid, small enough to conceal even in confinement. I read of survival, Isabella, something your kind seems to have forgotten how to do without preying on others. Isabella's smile twisted into a snarl. Insolent cur, she hissed, voice dropping into something primal and guttural. In a blur, she breached the magical wards, an act of brute power and dark manipulation that shouldn't have been possible, and lunged into the cell. Ingrid dodged just in time. The vampire's claws grazed her shoulder, leaving a burning gash. The pain flared hot, but Ingrid didn't falter. She had no choice. Her swords were gone, confiscated when she was taken, and the suppression wards etched into the walls of the cell dulled her senses, dampened her power. All she had was a single silver-edged dagger Alessandro had allowed her to keep, a small gesture of trust, or perhaps a test. She slashed at Isabella's side, the silver edge searing the vampire's flesh, drawing a sharp hiss. The fight was a brutal, silent flurry of violence within the cramped cell. Ingrid's movements were desperate but precise, fighting not to win but to survive. She was outmatched, her strength muted by the magic pressing against her like invisible chains. Isabella, caught off guard by such fierce resistance from a weakened foe, grew more furious, more reckless. Just as she raised her clawed hand for a final, killing blow, a roar thundered through the castle. A sound of ancient rage, terrible, primal, commanding. Alessandro. He burst into the corridor like a storm made flesh, his eyes burning with cold fury. He took in the scene, the blood, the shattered ward, the terror in Ingrid's eyes, the madness in Isabella's. "Isabella," he growled, the sound barely human. "What have you done?" The room fell deathly silent. Isabella froze, her eyes wide with the sudden realization that she had crossed a line even centuries of privilege could not shield her from. Alessandro's aura crackled with unrestrained power, and his gaze promised retribution. The fight was over, but the consequences had just begun. Chapter 7: Unlikely Allies. The aftermath of Isabella's attack on Ingrid hung heavy in the castle air, a palpable tension that permeated every stone. Alessandro's fury, though contained, was a chilling force. He had found Ingrid bleeding yet defiant, her posture upright despite the pain, while Isabella stood nearby, still seething with unspent malice. The sight of Ingrid's wound, however superficial, ignited a protective rage in him he hadn't felt in centuries. What cut even deeper was the knowledge that he had left her vulnerable. He knew how strong she truly was, how formidable when unshackled, but it was by his own command that her powers had been dampened, her weapons stripped, her freedom constrained. He had allowed her only a fraction of her strength, believing it a necessary precaution. And now she had bled under his roof, defended herself with scraps, and still stood tall. In that moment, Alessandro saw not just a hybrid, not just a curiosity or a guest, but someone he was beginning to feel a profound, inexplicable connection to. Someone harmed in a place that should have protected her. He confronted Isabella in his private chambers, the room thick with the unspoken history of their tumultuous past. Silas stood silently by the door, a grim witness. "You attacked her," Alessandro stated, his voice devoid of emotion, yet carrying a dangerous undertone that made the very air vibrate. "In my home, against my express wishes." Isabella scoffed, her beautiful face twisted with contempt. "She is an abomination, Alessandro, a stain on your reputation, a threat to our kind. You bring a hybrid into our sacred halls. What madness has possessed you? I merely sought to cleanse your castle of her foul presence, to remind you of your true loyalties." Her voice rose, shrill with indignation and wounded pride. "She is beneath you, a common creature of the earth, while we are ancient, pure-blooded." Alessandro's eyes, usually dark pools of calm, flared with a cold, ancient fire. "Your loyalty is born of possessiveness, Isabella, and your purity is a cage. My decisions are my own. And this creature of the earth, as you so eloquently put it, has shown more honor and courage than you have displayed in centuries. She fights for her people, for survival, not for petty power or twisted desires." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, a tone that promised swift and terrible consequences. "You have overstepped, you have betrayed my trust, and you have endangered the fragile peace I am attempting to forge. This castle is no longer your home, Isabella. You are banished." Isabella's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock replacing her fury. "Banished? You would banish me? For her? After all we have shared? After everything?" Her voice was a disbelieving gasp, then it hardened into a venomous snarl. "You will regret this, Alessandro. You will regret turning your back on your own kind, on me, for a mere half-breed. This is not over, not by a long shot." With a furious swirl of her midnight gown, she turned and swept from the room, her exit a dramatic, furious statement. She did not look back. Her banishment, however, was not an end, but a beginning. In Valerius's fortress, Blackmount. For years, perhaps centuries, Lord Valerius Thorn had been weaving his quiet rebellion from the shadows. An ancient and notoriously ruthless vampire lord, Valerius had never accepted Alessandro's rise, nor his progressive ideals. He viewed Alessandro's desire for coexistence with hybrids and mortals as betrayal, an erosion of the purity and dominion that vampires were born to uphold. Underneath his stoic surface, Valerius seethed with disdain, and he had already begun to act. He had been testing Alessandro's strength, his reach, his will. Whispers were planted in dark corners of the old covens, doubts seeded like rot. Progeny of Valerius had been unleashed in secret, turned deliberately unstable, taught to feed wildly, recklessly, their minds warped until they hunted like rogues. Each act of violence was a message. Alessandro is losing control. But Alessandro had responded swiftly, almost too swiftly. His coven had hunted Valerius's wayward progeny down and eradicated them before the rumors could spread too far. Valerius had underestimated his enemy's vigilance, and it cost him valuable pawns. Still, he had learned. "Alessandro has lost his way, my sire," Isabella hissed, her voice dripping with venom as she recounted her banishment, twisting the narrative to paint Alessandro as a deluded fool, corrupted by a lesser being. "He embraces abominations, he seeks alliances with the very creatures we were born to dominate. He is weak, he is compromised, he is no longer fit to lead." Valerius listened in silence, his ancient eyes gleaming with cold, calculating satisfaction. He did not yet know what this hybrid meant to Alessandro, whether she was a soldier, a symbol, or something more, but it did not matter. Alessandro had spared her. That alone was enough. To the old bloodlines, mercy was weakness, and Valerius would make sure they saw it that way. He would twist Alessandro's restraint into cowardice, his banishment of Isabella into fear, his tolerance into treason. They didn't need the truth. They only needed to believe that their leader had lost the will to defend their kind from impurity. This time, Valerius would not simply strike from the shadows. He would let the rot bloom in the open. He would let Alessandro's compromises fester in the eyes of the council. The covens would whisper again, but this time louder, with conviction. In Carpathian Castle. Meanwhile, the fragile, uneasy peace of the region was shattered by a sudden, violent attack that echoed through the ancient forests and even reached the secluded castle. News came fast, carried by frightened, bloodied messengers, about a brutal strike on a remote vampire outpost deep in the eastern woods, far from any human town. At first, many vampires thought hybrids were behind it because old fears and hatred made them quick to blame the usual enemy. But this was something new and terrifying. "They call themselves the Purifiers," Silas told Alessandro, his voice serious and full of worry. He showed Alessandro pictures of burned land and vampire bodies twisted beyond recognition, silent screams frozen in time. "They are humans but with strange and powerful weapons. Silver bullets that burn like fire, machines that shine deadly UV light, and sounds that confuse even the oldest vampires, making them easy to kill. They hate all supernatural creatures with a fanatical fury. They left a message, written in blood on a stone wall. Cleanse the earth. Leave no trace of the unnatural for God and man. The reckoning is here." Alessandro asked other vampire lords for help, trying to unite everyone against this terrible threat. But many of the old lords chose to stay out of it. Rumors spread that Alessandro was losing control, and they did not want to risk their own power by standing with him. They were afraid to fall with him if he failed. This left Alessandro almost alone against a new and deadly enemy, one that did not care about old rivalries or rules. It wanted to destroy all who were not human. With few allies left, Alessandro considered turning to the hybrid he had captured. Maybe he could strike a deal with her, using her strength and defiance to fight this threat together. It was a risky move, but with enemies closing in from all sides, he had little choice. Alessandro entered the dimly lit chamber quietly, carrying a small, ornate box of healing salves and bandages. His gaze immediately fell upon Ingrid, seated on the edge of a stone bench, the faint scar on her arm, still tender, slowly knitting shut, pulling painfully at his heart. Despite her fierce defiance and strength, the wound was a reminder that hybrids, unlike vampires, bore the curse of slow healing. Though immortal in lifespan, their bodies mended much like those of humans, no accelerated regeneration, no instant recovery from injury. Each cut, each bruise left a lingering ache, a vulnerability. He knelt beside her, his touch gentle but deliberate as he uncovered the healing flesh. The faint pink of new skin was promising, but the slight swelling and tightness betrayed how fresh the pain still was. It still aches, he murmured, more to himself than to her, the cold iron in his chest tightening. It should not have been like this. Ingrid met his eyes, unflinching. I survived. Since the attack, Isabella's violent betrayal, Alessandro's demeanor toward her had softened, a subtle shift that had not gone unnoticed. He had been kinder, more protective, almost as if her pain awakened a long-buried part of him he had kept chained. He reached for a vial of cooling balm and carefully applied it to the wound, his fingers steady despite the turmoil brewing beneath his calm exterior. One of the cruel ironies of your kind, he murmured, almost to himself, immortal yet healing like mortals, a weakness you bear. Ingrid said nothing, but allowed the care, a brief, quiet moment of reprieve in a castle thick with tension. The truce between them was uneasy, coiled like a snake waiting to strike, but for now necessary. When he finished, he straightened, stepping back and meeting her gaze with an intensity that made the space feel smaller, more charged. There is more, he said, his voice low and urgent. He began to pace the cold stone floor, his words measured, each one weighed. Last night, a vampire outpost in the eastern forests was annihilated, not by hybrids, not by rival clans, humans organized, armed, precise, weapons built specifically to destroy our kind, silver that burns like sanctified fire, UV emitters, sonic disruptors. It was an execution, nothing left but ash. Ingrid's expression hardened, jaw tightening. The Purifiers, she said, her voice sharp with bitter recognition. They've hunted my kind for years. Hybrids, vampires, it doesn't matter to them. We're all monsters in their eyes. Alessandro turned to face her fully, the last traces of pride and command dimmed by something more rare, resolve laced with humility. I've seen what's coming, he said, and I know we can't survive it divided. I need your help. Ingrid's eyes gleamed with something dangerous, amusement maybe, or something darker. She leaned back slightly, the edge of a smirk curling her lips. Is that what this is, then? She drawled. The great Alessandro seeking alliance with the half-blood he locked away. Tell me, how will your noble allies react when they hear you've partnered with a hybrid? Will they whisper, or will they burn you next to me? Her words hung like daggers in the air, sharp and deliberate. He didn't flinch. Let them whisper, he said evenly. You're strong, stronger than most, and together we might be powerful enough to survive what's coming. Silence stretched between them, tense, electric. Then Ingrid's expression shifted, the smirk fading into something more serious, more curious. She was still caged, still wounded, but no longer powerless. I'll contact my people, she said at last, voice quiet. But understand this, if I stand with you, it's not out of loyalty, it's survival, and I don't trust easily. Alessandro nodded once. Nor do I. And with that, the first thread of a fragile, formidable alliance was woven, born not of trust, but necessity. His hand moved to his belt, producing a sleek, modern device, his cell phone. I will let you contact your people. This alliance, it will have to be one-time, fragile, but it may be our only chance to survive. Ingrid's lips parted in surprise, a flicker of hope shining in her eyes. He nodded, silently acknowledging the weight of the moment. Call them, tell them I am granting you this, and that the threat is real. She took the phone carefully, fingers trembling slightly as she dialed. Astrid's office, Northern Enclave headquarters. The war room buzzed with controlled chaos. Maps of contested territories lit the walls, red pins showing lost contact zones. Screens showed blurred thermal scans and intercepted purifier transmissions. The air hung thick with tension and exhaustion. Astrid stood at the center of it all, tall and commanding, her pale gold braid falling down one shoulder. Her usually composed face was drawn, jaw clenched as her blue eyes flicked across the data. Beside her stood Kale, her most trusted enforcer, a broad-shouldered hybrid with a brooding presence and a voice like quiet thunder. Several officers worked feverishly behind them, whispering and cross-referencing reports. Suddenly, a chime cut through the hum of voices. A private line lit up on the console in front of her. Astrid's heart stuttered. She didn't recognize the number, but something in her blood, something ancient and intuitive, surged. Her fingers trembled slightly as she pressed accept. Hello, her voice was clipped, defensive. There was a pause, a breath, and then, Astrid, it's me, Ingrid. The room fell away. For a full second, Astrid didn't breathe. Her knees threatened to give. She gripped the edge of the desk so hard her knuckles went white. Ingrid, her voice cracked for the first time in months. Gods, is it really? Where the hell have you been? Cale turned sharply, eyes wide. The room went silent. Every officer paused, hearing the name echo through the space. Back in Alessandro's estate, moments before ending the call. Ingrid clutched the phone tightly, sitting at the edge of a low couch, the warmth of the fire behind her doing little to ease the chill from her blood. Alessandro stood across the room, arms crossed, gaze sharp but calm. Astrid, Ingrid began, her voice cracking slightly, I was captured by vampires. There was a sharp inhale on the other end of the line. But that's not important now, she continued quickly, before Astrid could explode with questions. What matters is what I've learned since. There's a chance, maybe the only one we have, to forge an alliance, a real one. Astrid's voice was hard, controlled. With vampires. Yes. A beat, then bluntly, do you trust them? Ingrid looked over at Alessandro. His eyes met hers with that unnerving stillness, and though her chest tightened with uncertainty, she said, I don't know if I trust them. Silence hung in the air. I know how it sounds, Ingrid added. But the Purifiers, Astrid, they're coming for everyone. They attacked Alessandro's kind too. He lost dozens. They're trying to wipe us all out, pure blood or not. They've found a way to kill us. Weapons, enhanced tech, and they're moving faster than we can. Astrid didn't reply immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was lower, more measured. You think this vampire can help us stop them? I think this might be the only chance we have. Astrid let out a long breath, her voice barely above a whisper. Then set the meeting. I want to see him with my own eyes. Later, a secure call between Astrid and Alessandro. Ingrid stood nearby as Astrid and Alessandro came face to face for the first time, virtually. Astrid's image flickered onto the screen, regal, poised, and seething with quiet suspicion. Alessandro gave a short nod, voice like velvet over steel. Astrid of the North, a pleasure. Is it? She asked coolly. You captured one of my best. I'm not inclined to call this diplomacy. She's free, isn't she? He countered calmly. Astrid's eyes narrowed. Convenient. Perhaps, but what's more important is that we share a threat. The Purifiers will not stop at borders or bloodlines. They want extinction. I'm proposing survival. Astrid folded her arms. What are you really offering? A truce, temporary, tactical, intelligence exchange, shared scouts, and if necessary, blood spilled side by side. She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to peel back the charm and find the predator lurking beneath. Her voice was quiet but firm when she replied, I don't like your kind. I don't expect you to, Alessandro said, his tone unwavering. Liking isn't required, survival is. Another beat of silence passed between them. Then Astrid gave a single, sharp nod. So be it, she said. We fight together until this threat is ended. And just like that, the alliance was forged. Fragile, unlikely, but necessary. Chapter 8, Beneath the Surface. The first tentative steps of their alliance led Alessandro and Ingrid out of the castle's ancient walls and into the shadowed, desolate landscapes where the Purifiers had struck. Before leaving, Alessandro had divided his forces. Silas and a handful of loyal vampires remained behind to guard the castle, its ancient wards still humming faintly with protective power. Others had been dispatched eastward, engaging in smaller missions to harass Purifier supply lines and buy time. Now Alessandro and Ingrid moved south toward the heart of enemy territory. Their goal was clear: to strike deep, disrupt the Purifier network, and hold position until the hybrid alliance, an uneasy coalition of outcasts and shapeshifters, could join them in force. The air was thick with the scent of ash and decay, a grim testament to the humans' efficiency, a chilling reminder of their destructive power. They passed through abandoned villages, once bustling with life, now silent except for the creak of empty swings in the wind, the occasional shattered window reflecting the moonlight like a vacant, accusing eye. Houses stood with gaping holes where walls had been, furniture splintered, and the lingering scent of fear and burnt flesh clung to everything. They were two of the strongest beings in the realm, but even their combined power would be tested. The South was crawling with over 1,000 purifiers, each one armed with cutting-edge tech designed specifically to destroy creatures like them. It was a suicide mission by any measure, but they both knew it was a necessary one. The war would not wait. Forced to rely on each other in these dangerous, hostile environments, their individual strengths became glaringly apparent, complementing each other in ways neither had anticipated. Ingrid's unparalleled tracking abilities were invaluable. She moved through the undergrowth like a phantom, her boots silent on fallen leaves, her hybrid senses discerning the faintest disturbance in the forest. A snapped twig, a subtle shift in the air currents, the lingering metallic tang of vampire blood, or the acrid scent of human fear. "Wait," she whispered one evening, holding out a hand as they moved along a tree line. She crouched beside a dark smear in the dirt, running a gloved finger along its edge. "They passed through here, less than 2 hours ago." Alessandro knelt beside her, gaze narrowing. "They're moving faster." "And sloppier," she replied, holding up a discarded purifier insignia half buried beneath leaves. "They're getting desperate." Her combat skills, brutal and efficient, were a blur of motion, her silver-laced blades a constant, shimmering threat. Alessandro, in turn, possessed an ancient knowledge of the land, a strategic mind honed by centuries of warfare. He could dissect a battlefield in moments, predicting enemy movements, understanding the flow of conflict with an almost prescient insight. "They'll circle back through the ravine," he murmured, eyes scanning the distant cliffs. "They always push too far into unfamiliar terrain, then panic." His raw, overwhelming power could shatter stone with a mere gesture, and his presence alone was a deterrent. He knew the hidden paths, the forgotten caves, the ancient ley lines that crisscrossed the mountains, secrets whispered to him by the very earth beneath his feet. Together, they moved as a single, deadly unit, a strange, fluid dance of two beings who, by all rights, should have been enemies. Their movements were synchronized by necessity, a silent understanding growing between them with each shared risk, each averted danger, each moment of quiet observation. One night, as a cold, biting wind swept through the skeletal remains of a ruined settlement, they sought shelter in a damp, forgotten crypt. The air inside was thick with the scent of mildew and ancient earth, a cold, oppressive atmosphere clinging to them like a shroud. The only light came from a single, flickering lantern Alessandro carried, casting long, dancing shadows that made the intricate carvings on the crypt walls, faded symbols of forgotten beliefs, seem to writhe. Suddenly, a purifier patrol passed perilously close. Their heavy boots crunched on the fallen leaves just outside the crypt's crumbling entrance, their harsh, whispered commands cutting through the oppressive silence like knives. Their flashlights, bright and intrusive, cut through the darkness like searching eyes, sweeping dangerously close to their hiding spot, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. Alessandro, with an instinct born of centuries of survival, an almost primal response to danger, instinctively pulled Ingrid close. He pressed her against the cold, rough stone wall, his hand clamping over her mouth to stifle any sound, any gasp of breath. "Don't move," he breathed, voice barely audible even to her keen ears. Her body was rigid against his, tense with adrenaline, every muscle coiled, but she didn't fight him, didn't struggle. The unexpected intimacy of the moment was jarring. The scent of him, ancient and powerful, yet strangely comforting in its intensity, a blend of old parchment, cold stone, and something uniquely his, filled her senses, a primal awareness of his presence. His breath ghosted across her hair. "We'll wait 10 more seconds," he murmured, count silent but precise. "Then they'll be gone." She gave the faintest nod, her heart slamming against her ribs. The hard planes of his chest against her back, the slow, steady, powerful beat of her heart against his still heart. It was a rhythm that was both dead and yet vibrantly alive, a unique cadence that now felt strangely comforting, a paradox she was beginning to accept. When the danger passed, when the sounds of the patrol finally faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of their ragged breathing echoing in the crypt, Alessandro slowly released her. Their eyes met in the dim, oppressive light. "You all right?" he asked, voice lower now, touched with something like concern. Ingrid nodded, voice quiet. "Yeah." It was a silent acknowledgement of their shared vulnerability, a recognition of their absolute reliance on each other in that terrifying moment. But there was something else, a spark that hadn't been there before, a fleeting, electric current that passed between them, a silent understanding that transcended words, a raw, undeniable connection that pulsed between them. "I didn't expect you to care if I got caught," she said finally, her tone guarded but curious. He hesitated, his expression unreadable. "You're part of this alliance. If they take you, we both lose." The air crackled with an unspoken tension, a new awareness, a silent question hanging between them, a question that hinted at possibilities beyond their immediate survival, a future they were both too afraid to name, yet increasingly drawn to. Ingrid's voice, when it came again, was a whisper. "We might not survive this." Alessandro's reply was just as quiet. "Then let's make sure what we do matters." The cold of the crypt seemed to recede, replaced by a strange, unsettling warmth that had nothing to do with the outside temperature. Chapter 9, Echoes of Pain. The tension between them was a palpable thing, a taut string vibrating with unspoken emotions, a silent hum that filled the spaces between their words, growing stronger with each passing day. One rainy evening, deep within the shadowed woods, they huddled under a thick, waterproof tarp strung between ancient trees. Maps, crudely drawn but meticulously marked with red crosses indicating destroyed supernatural strongholds, were spread across a flattened rock, illuminated by the flickering glow of a shielded lantern. The rain lashed against the canopy of leaves above them, mirroring the storm brewing within Ingrid. Ingrid, seeing a particularly devastating picture of a hybrid safe house, a place she vaguely recognized from her youth, clenched her fists, her knuckles white against the damp stone. A bitter ache twisted in Ingrid's gut as her mind flashed back to the desperate measures her people took to survive. The image of a guarded hybrid hospital, a sanctuary tucked away in a remote valley, rose unbidden in her memory. It was meant to provide support to human women carrying half-vampire children, a place where vulnerability was met with fierce protection. But the Purifiers had stormed it, and similar places, repeatedly. It wasn't a one-time event. It was a constant, brutal reality. Only about 10% of human women survived the birth of a hybrid child, a fact whispered in hushed tones among her people. Those who did, for their own safety and the protection of the burgeoning hybrid community, had their memories altered, the trauma carefully excised. It was a cruel necessity. And the infants, born so rarely with the resilience to survive such a tumultuous birth, were then whisked away to secure facilities, trained from a young age to protect themselves, to harness their unique blend of strengths. It was a secret her people guarded fiercely, a last bastion of hope. Alessandro, noticing the sudden rigidity in her posture, the way her knuckles had whitened, leaned slightly closer. "Are you all right?" he murmured, his voice softer than usual, a hint of concern in his tone. Ingrid flinched, snapping out of her internal reverie. Her gaze, when it met his, was raw, thick with unshed tears that she stubbornly refused to let fall. "Purifiers and your kind killed so many," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mothers, children, the ones we fought so hard to protect, the ones we failed. It's a constant fear, Alessandro. Every day we live with the knowledge that we could be next, that our kind could simply vanish." She spoke haltingly about the constant fear that plagued her people, the desperate measures they took to survive, the crushing grief of losing so many of her kind to vampire hunters, or, increasingly, to these new, fanatical human groups. She spoke of the sacrifices, the hidden lives, the constant vigilance. Alessandro listened, his usual aloofness replaced by a quiet, almost unnerving intensity. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He simply listened, his dark eyes fixed on her, absorbing every word, every nuance of her pain. When she finished, the silence in their makeshift shelter was profound, broken only by the drumming of rain on the leaves. Then he spoke, his voice low, a deep resonance that seemed to carry the weight of ages, a profound weariness. "Centuries," he said, his gaze distant, lost in the echoes of his own past. "I have seen empires rise and fall, loved ones turn to dust, and the world change beyond recognition. I have buried more friends, more lovers, more family than I can count. Each century, a new layer of loss, a new ghost to haunt the halls of my memory. There is a profound loneliness in outliving all you have known, in watching everything you cherish crumble to dust while you remain, unchanging, untouched by time's decay." He didn't explicitly share his pain, didn't detail his losses, but the unspoken weight of his long, solitary existence hung in the air between them, a mirror to her own grief, a shared understanding of loss that transcended their species. For the first time, Ingrid saw not just a vampire, a powerful ancient being, but a being burdened by immense time and profound, quiet sorrow, a being who understood the very core of her pain. "Children, you said," Alessandro murmured, his curiosity piqued. His dark eyes held a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. "Their birth. I confess, I've always been curious about the process for your kind. How do they come into the world?" Ingrid flinched, her expression immediately shuddered. Her jaw tightened and she looked away, a flicker of suspicion returning to her eyes. "That's not something I discuss." The words were clipped, final. Alessandro leaned back slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaping him. "I see. I suppose I haven't earned that trust yet." His tone was dry, a hint of something unreadable in his gaze. Her head snapped back to him, a sharp, almost defensive retort on her lips. "Trust? I'm not sure I'd trust my captor with such details." The words were out before she could truly think, laced with a bitterness she hadn't intended. A strange stillness settled in their small space. Alessandro's expression hardened, his eyes narrowing. Then with a slow, deliberate movement, he shifted closer. The air crackled with a sudden, dangerous intensity as he moved towards her, his presence utterly dominant. He stopped directly in front of her, leaning in close, his voice a low, resonant whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "Are you so sure," he breathed, his gaze piercing, "that you are the one being captured?" The question hung in the air, a challenge, a subtle shift in their dynamic. Ingrid's breath hitched, her heart slamming against her ribs. His proximity was dizzying, the scent of him ancient, powerful, dangerous, filling her senses. The lines of power of captor and captive blurred and twisted, leaving her breathless and strangely vulnerable. The rain still lashed against the tarp, a frantic rhythm to the chaotic beats of her own heart. Their grief, though distinct in its origins, fueled a new, unspoken bond. It hardened their resolve as they ventured back into the ravaged lands, a silent vow to make the Purifiers pay. They moved like shadows, a blur of motion against the desolate landscape, their attacks swift and merciless. They targeted supply lines, ambushing convoys under the cloak of darkness, disrupting communication networks, and leaving chaos in their wake. One night, hidden in the dense undergrowth overlooking a winding mountain pass, they watched a Purifier patrol advance, their advanced thermal scopes sweeping the terrain. Ingrid's senses, honed by years of evasion, picked up the subtle shifts in the wind, the distant chatter of the Purifiers. "5 of them," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. "2 scouts ahead, 3 main body, moving fast." Alessandro nodded, already calculating. "The scouts will be exposed as they round that bend. We hit them there, then funnel the others into the narrow path." They struck with blinding speed. Ingrid launched herself from the trees, a silver-laced blade flashing in the moonlight, silencing the first scout before he could even raise an alarm. Alessandro, a dark whirlwind, moved behind her, his hand an indistinguishable blur as he snapped the neck of the second. It was a brutal ballet, a synchronized dance of death. As the remaining Purifiers rounded the bend, they were met by a force they couldn't comprehend. Ingrid moved with a primal grace, her hybrid strength allowing her to disarm and incapacitate with terrifying efficiency. She spun, dodged, and struck, her movements a fluid extension of her intent. One moment she was a whisper in the shadows, the next, a silver flash that left an enemy unconscious. Alessandro was a force of nature. He didn't just fight, he commanded the very air around him. A mere flick of his wrist sent a Purifier flying into a rock face. a whisper of a spell causing another's weapon to explode in his hands. Ingrid, watching him, felt a strange surge of awe. His power was immense, yet controlled, precise. He moved like a predatory phantom, his attacks devastatingly effective, leaving no room for error. She'd always known he was powerful, but seeing him in full combat, a dark, elegant dance of destruction, was something else entirely. A grudging respect, bordering on admiration, flickered within her. And he, in turn, found himself increasingly impressed by her. Her speed was startling, a match for his own. Her blades, laced with silver, moved with a lethal grace that was both horrifying and beautiful. She was a whirlwind of controlled ferocity, adapting to every threat, her instincts sharp and unerring. She fought with the raw, untamed power of her hybrid nature, combined with a tactical mind that surprised him. He had underestimated her, a fact he was slowly but surely correcting. As the last purifier fell, silenced by a swift, precise strike from Ingrid, they stood in the sudden quiet, the only sounds the rustle of leaves and their own ragged breaths. Their eyes met, a shared understanding passing between them. "You're fast," Alessandro said, his voice holding a hint of genuine surprise. Ingrid smirked, a rare, fleeting expression. "You're not so bad yourself for an ancient." A faint smile touched Alessandro's lips, a sight so rare it made Ingrid's heart skip a beat. It wasn't the cold, almost predatory smile she was used to, but something softer, more genuine. In the quiet aftermath, surrounded by the fallen, a different kind of tension hummed in the air, a silent acknowledgement of their seamless teamwork, of how truly effective they were together. Back in the relative safety of a hidden cave they used as a temporary base, a small fire casting dancing shadows on the rough stone walls, Ingrid found herself watching Alessandro. He was meticulously cleaning his gauntlets, his face impassive. Her earlier anger and grief had faded, replaced by a strange, almost electric awareness of him. His movements were deliberate, ancient, yet undeniably masculine. She felt a warmth spread through her, a softening she hadn't anticipated. The way he'd pulled her close in the crypt, the concern in his voice, it had chipped away at her carefully constructed walls. He was a vampire, her traditional enemy, yet he was also the only one who truly understood the weight of her losses, who had faced similar depths of sorrow. Her heart, so long hardened by fear and grief, felt like it was slowly, irrevocably melting. "We make a good team," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Alessandro looked up, his dark eyes catching the firelight. "Indeed, we do." His gaze lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, a silent question in their depths. The air thickened with unspoken possibilities, a fragile hope blossoming in the desolation that surrounded them. Chapter 10, Forged in Fire. A rustle in the deeper woods caught their attention. Ingrid's hand went to her blade, but Alessandro held up a hand, his senses already identifying the familiar, albeit wary, presence. From the shadows emerged Astrid and Kale, their faces grim, followed by 10 other hybrids, all clad in their combat leathers, weapons glinting faintly in the dim light. Relief, sharp and unexpected, flooded Ingrid. "You're late," Ingrid said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips despite the exhaustion. Her eyes lit up as Kale stepped forward, a familiar warmth in her gaze. There was an easy camaraderie between them, a bond forged in countless shared dangers and long years of fighting side by side. Kale, for his part, offered a rare, soft smile, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than strictly necessary, a subtle possessiveness in his stance as he moved to stand closer to her. Astrid, her eyes scanning the fallen purifiers, nodded. "We ran into some unexpected resistance. Looks like you handled most of it." Her gaze flickered to Alessandro, a flicker of surprise in her eyes at the sheer number of defeated enemies. Kale, ever practical, knelt beside a fallen purifier, examining his gear. "Their numbers are thinning here. Good work." He glanced at Alessandro, a nod of grudging respect passing between them, though a faint, almost imperceptible tension tightened his jaw as he noted Alessandro's proximity to Ingrid. Alessandro observed the exchange between Ingrid and Kale, a subtle narrowing of his dark eyes. He hadn't missed the way Kale's gaze had softened for Ingrid, or the easy familiarity between them. A flicker of something unfamiliar, something sharp and possessive, stirred within him. With the combined force, the remaining scattered Purifier patrols in the immediate vicinity were swiftly dealt with. The hybrids, fueled by a long-simmering rage, moved with brutal efficiency, their coordinated attacks leaving no room for escape. Once the area was secured, Alessandro made the decision to return to the castle. The immediate threat in the woods had been neutralized, and it was time to regroup, assess the larger strategic picture, and prepare for the next phase of the war. The journey back was quieter, a sense of shared victory, however small, settling over the group. Kale walked close to Ingrid, their shoulders occasionally brushing, exchanging low words and shared glances that spoke of a deep, comfortable friendship. Alessandro, walking slightly ahead, found his senses unnervingly attuned to their presence, a faint irritation coiling in his gut each time he heard Ingrid's soft laugh in response to something Kale said. As they approached the ancient stronghold, the familiar silhouette of the castle against the stormy sky was a welcome sight. Silas met them at the gate, his usually composed demeanor frayed around the edges. "My lord," Silas said, bowing his head to Alessandro, then nodding to Ingrid. "We were attacked, twice, heavy assaults both times. They tried to breach the outer wards, then the main gate, but we held them. The castle stands." His voice held a note of weary triumph, but his eyes were sharp, assessing the newcomers, particularly the hybrids. Alessandro placed a hand on Silas's shoulder. "Well done, old friend. We will discuss the details after we have rested." He led the way inside, the hybrids following, their wary eyes taking in the ancient stone and the vampire guards who watched them with equal caution. Kale, ever protective, kept a watchful eye on Ingrid as they entered the unfamiliar territory. In the days that followed, a new routine settled over the castle. With the immediate threat contained, attention turned to preparation and integration. Alessandro, ever the strategist, insisted on rigorous training. He often found himself sparring with Ingrid in the castle's vast, echoing training hall. The air crackled with their combined power, their movements a blur of controlled force and elegant precision. Each parry, each strike was a testament to their individual strengths and their growing, almost intuitive understanding of each other. Ingrid felt his presence in the room, a deep hum beneath her skin, a magnetic pull that transcended the physical. She could anticipate his moves, feel the shift in his weight, the subtle tension in his muscles before he even committed to an attack. And he, in turn, seemed to know her every thought, every feint, every hidden intention. The training was intense, brutal, yet exhilarating. Kale often observed their training sessions, a silent, watchful presence. Sometimes he would offer Ingrid a tip or a brief, encouraging word, and Alessandro would find himself clenching his jaw, a dark, unfamiliar possessiveness stirring within him. He would push Ingrid harder in those moments, a silent challenge to the hybrid. One evening, after a particularly grueling session that left them both breathless and glistening with sweat, they stood facing each other, their chests heaving. The air was thick with their shared exertion, the scent of ozone and something uniquely them mingling in the space. Ingrid's gaze lingered on Alessandro's face, on the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, the intensity in his dark eyes. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The unspoken tension between them, so long a subtle hum, now vibrated with an undeniable force. Alessandro reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing lightly over her cheekbone. His touch was electric, sending shivers down her spine. Her breath hitched. His eyes, dark and ancient, held a depth she was only beginning to fathom, a silent question, a raw vulnerability she hadn't seen before. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But she didn't. Her eyes fluttered closed as his lips met hers, a soft, tentative touch that quickly deepened. It was a kiss born of shared trauma, grudging respect, and a burgeoning, undeniable attraction. A fiery, desperate embrace that spoke of battles fought and won, of loss endured, and of a fragile, burgeoning hope. It was hot, consuming, a silent promise in the heart of a war-torn world. Later, the political discussions began in earnest. Alessandro, Silas, Astrid, and Kale gathered in the castle's war room, maps spread across the table, flickering candlelight casting long shadows. The air was thick with the weight of strategy and the unspoken tensions between the leaders. "The Purifiers are relentless," Kale stated, his voice grim. "Their attacks on hybrid safe houses are escalating. They're trying to flush us out, to force us into open conflict before the full alliance can mobilize." He caught Ingrid's eye, a shared understanding of the stakes passing between them. "Their technology is advancing rapidly," Silas added, tapping a finger on a marked location. "These new energy dampeners are proving problematic for our more direct approaches." Alessandro's gaze swept over the map, his mind already working through countless scenarios. "We need to hit them where it hurts most, their leadership and their supply chains. But we also need to protect the remaining hybrid enclaves. We need more allies." He looked at Ingrid, a silent acknowledgement of her people's plight, his gaze briefly flicking to Kale, a subtle challenge in his eyes. "The shapeshifters are hesitant," Astrid admitted, her arms crossed. "They value their independence above all else. Convincing them to commit fully will require more than just a common enemy. They need to see a viable path to victory and a future where they are not hunted." Alessandro nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "Then we must demonstrate our commitment, not just through words but through actions. We will continue to disrupt the Purifiers, but we will also send aid to the vulnerable communities. We will show the shapeshifters that this alliance offers true security, a future where all supernatural beings can thrive, not just survive." He paused, his eyes meeting Ingrid's. "This war is not just about survival anymore. It's about building something new, something stronger from the ashes of the old world." The political stakes were higher than ever, intertwined with the personal bonds slowly forming in the heart of the conflict, and the unspoken rivalries brewing beneath the surface. Chapter 11, Breaking the Chains. Ingrid found herself battling an internal war, a fierce, relentless struggle between ingrained instinct and burgeoning emotion. The kiss, hot and consuming, had shattered more than just the physical distance between them. It had ignited a firestorm within her soul. Every fiber of her being, every lesson learned since childhood, screamed, "Vampire, enemy, danger." The faces of fallen hybrids, the whispered stories of vampire cruelty, flashed through her mind like a relentless, condemning montage. She felt like a traitor to her people, to the countless lives lost at the hands of creatures like him. A common enemy bound them now, but what would happen when the Purifiers were gone? Would the ancient animosity simply resurface, leaving her exposed and vulnerable? Because of this turmoil, Ingrid began to subtly avoid Alessandro. She would immerse herself in strategy meetings with Astrid and Kale, spend extra hours training with the other hybrids, or patrol the castle's perimeter with a fierce dedication. She kept her conversations with Alessandro strictly professional, her answers clipped, her gaze averted whenever his dark eyes lingered on her. The magnetic pull she felt towards him was terrifying, a betrayal of everything she believed in, and she fought against it with every ounce of her formidable will. Yet every interaction with Alessandro, even the strained, formal ones, chipped away at that deeply ingrained fear, that primal distrust, like water eroding stone. She saw his honor in the way he treated his loyal staff, his formidable intelligence in his strategic planning, his quiet moments of contemplation as he studied ancient texts, and the unexpected tenderness beneath his ancient, often stoic facade. He was a paradox, a walking contradiction to everything she had been taught. One night, unable to contain the turmoil that raged within her, she risked a secure communication with Astrid, finding a secluded corner of the castle courtyard where the moonlight was obscured by heavy clouds. Her voice was a raw whisper, laced with confusion and a desperate need for guidance. He's not what I thought, Astrid. He's complicated. He's terrifying, yes, but also understanding. I don't understand it. I don't understand him. It feels wrong to feel this way, to even consider trusting him." The words tumbled out, a confession she hadn't dared to voice to anyone else. Astrid, wise and patient, her voice a soothing balm across the static of Ingrid's internal conflict, replied, "Sometimes the greatest strength is not in resisting, but in allowing your heart to feel what it truly feels, even if it defies all logic, all the old hatreds. The world is changing, Ingrid. The old ways, the old enmities, they are no longer enough to protect us. Perhaps our understanding of it and of each other must change too. Open your eyes and then perhaps open your heart. But be careful, little one. A vampire's heart is a labyrinth." The conversation with Astrid offered a fragile thread of hope, a permission she hadn't realized she needed. It didn't resolve her conflict entirely, but it softened the edges of her defiance, making her less rigid in her avoidance of Alessandro. Alessandro, sensing her internal struggle but more acutely, sensing her deliberate avoidance of him after their kiss, felt a sharp, unfamiliar pang in his ancient chest. He had never felt so strongly about anyone, not in centuries, and her sudden distance, her subtle redirection of her attention towards Kale, twisted something deep within him. It was a sensation akin to jealousy, raw and unsettling. He was accustomed to commanding, to being obeyed, not to being subtly shunned by the one person who had managed to breach his carefully constructed walls. He found himself watching her, a frustration building inside him. He needed to break through her defenses, to understand why she was pulling away after such a profound connection. One quiet afternoon, Alessandro found Ingrid in the castle's old library. She stood in front of a shelf, fingertips brushing along the spines of ancient books, her posture still, almost guarded. Light streamed in from the tall windows, casting soft shadows across the stone floor. He watched her for a moment from the doorway, silent. She hadn't noticed him, or maybe she had and was pretending not to. It had been this way for days now, short conversations, quick exits, glances that didn't quite meet his. Finally, he stepped forward, his voice low. "Didn't expect to find you here." Ingrid didn't turn. "It's quiet." A beat passed. "You've been quiet a lot lately." She shrugged. "I just needed space." He came closer, careful not to push too hard. "Is that why you've been avoiding me?" At that, she turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker in her eyes, something like guilt or hesitation. "I'm not avoiding you," she said too quickly. He tilted his head slightly, voice soft. "Then what would you call it?" She looked away, lips pressing into a thin line. "I'm just trying to be careful." "Careful," he echoed, "because of the kiss." That made her breath catch just a little. He saw it, even if she tried to hide it. "I don't regret it," Alessandro said gently. "Do you?" Ingrid hesitated. Her voice, when it came, was quiet but honest. "No, I regret how much it's been in my head since." Alessandro took a slow step toward her, closing the space between them. "You pulled away." "Because it scared me," she admitted. "Because it felt like something I could lose myself in, and I've never let myself have anything like that." He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he reached out and gently took her hand. She let him. "You don't have to lose yourself," he said. "Just let yourself feel, even if it's just here just for now." Her eyes finally met his, truly met his, and in them, he saw everything she'd been trying to hold back. The confusion, the longing, the war inside her. "I'm not good at this," she whispered. "You don't have to be," he said. "You just have to be here with me." Slowly, she nodded. Her fingers curled slightly around his. And in the quiet of the ancient library, something between them mended, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to begin again. Chapter 12, Whispers of Promise. Their conversations grew longer, deeper, stretching late into the night in the quiet solitude of Alessandro's study or the castle library. The only sounds were the crackle of the fireplace, the soft murmur of their voices, and the distant, rhythmic patter of rain against the ancient stone. Ingrid found herself leaning into these moments, a comfort settling over her that she hadn't known was possible. The walls she'd built so carefully began to lower, not in a dramatic crumble, but in soft, cautious pieces. One evening, she found herself tracing the intricate carvings on Alessandro's ancient desk, her voice a low whisper in the candlelight. "I remember," she said, almost to herself, "a hidden spring deep in the mountains. It was a place whispered about among my kind, a sanctuary where, for a fleeting time, we felt truly safe." It was a small detail, a personal memory shared, a testament to the trust that had begun to blossom between them. And Alessandro, seated across from her with one hand loosely cradling a glass of dark wine, said nothing. He just listened, the way someone listens when the words being spoken are more important than any response. Encouraged by the silence, she continued, her voice growing steadier, more raw. She told him about her childhood, about growing up in the shadows, the constant, gnawing fear of being discovered. The way people would look at her when they noticed something different, something not quite human. She spoke of the weight of responsibility, how it had settled on her shoulders too early, too heavily, and how that weight had shaped every choice she made. She told him about the hidden communities of hybrids, scattered and secret, always on edge. Of mothers giving birth in silence, underground, in the flickering light of borrowed generators, praying no scent would travel far enough to draw hunters. The constant threat under which new life was brought into the world. The heartbreak of watching hope dwindle. Alessandro didn't speak until the quiet stretched again between them. His voice, when it came, was low. "I never imagined what it cost your kind just to exist." She nodded, her fingers still resting on the carved edge of the desk. "Most never do." He shifted slightly closer, the fire casting shadows across the chiseled lines of his face. "But I see it now." Alessandro reached out, his hand gently caressing her cheek, his thumb brushing softly over her skin. His eyes, dark and ancient, held hers with an unwavering gaze that seemed to see into her very soul, stripping away her defenses. "My Ingrid," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "You carry the weight of worlds on your shoulders." His touch was a silent invitation, a gesture that spoke volumes, a tentative bridge across the chasm of their differences. This powerful, ancient being, capable of shattering stone with a thought, held himself with a restraint that was almost painful in its tenderness. Ingrid met his gaze, her breath steady, her heart filled not with fear, but with a profound sense of belonging. The ingrained lessons of caution, the old warnings about vampires had finally receded, replaced by an undeniable truth that resonated deep within her. A powerful, primal yearning for connection, long starved, now surged forward, urging her to embrace this unexpected bond. With a soft sigh of acceptance, a conscious decision to step fully into this unknown, she placed her hand in his. His touch was cold, as a vampire's always was, yet she felt an unexpected warmth spread through her, a comforting sensation that was utterly right, sending a shiver of something profound through her, a sense of destiny she had never known. His fingers, long and elegant, closed around hers with a gentle, almost reverent pressure. It was a promise, a quiet whisper of a future she had never dared to imagine, a future intertwined with his, a future where perhaps, just perhaps, they could find a place for both their kinds. The simple touch was more intimate than any embrace, a silent vow. Meanwhile, Cale, ever watchful, saw the subtle shift. He saw the way Ingrid's hand found Alessandro's, the way her shoulders relaxed, the quiet understanding that passed between them. A sharp, agonizing twist tightened in his chest. He had loved Ingrid for what felt like an eternity, a steady, unwavering devotion that asked for nothing in return but her safety and happiness. He had been her shield, her confidant, her unwavering friend through every trial. To see her turn to another, to a vampire no less, for the solace he had always longed to provide, was a bitter draught. He retreated into the shadows of the castle, his jaw clenched, a silent ache in his heart. He would never voice his feelings, not if it meant jeopardizing her happiness or the fragile alliance. But he would always be there, a silent guardian watching over her, his love a constant, unacknowledged presence. Many nights, after their long discussions, Ingrid would find herself drifting to sleep in a guest chamber near Alessandro's study, exhaustion finally claiming her. Alessandro would sometimes linger, watching her. One such night, as the moon cast long, silver streaks through the window, he approached her bedside. He sat gently on the edge of the bed, his presence a warm, comforting weight. He reached out, his hand hovering over her hair for a moment before he softly brushed a stray strand from her face. His touch was so light, so tender it was barely there. "Sleep, little hybrid," he whispered, his voice a low, melodic murmur barely audible. "Rest. The dawn will bring new challenges, but you will face them, and you will not face them alone." His fingers lingered on her cheek for a moment longer, a silent caress, before he rose and retreated into the shadows, leaving her to the peace of his unspoken promise, a warmth settling deep in her heart that had nothing to do with the castle's ancient fires. Chapter 13, The First Taste. The tension between them had been simmering for weeks, an invisible thread drawn taut with every glance, every lingering brush of fingertips, every word left unspoken. a storm waiting to break. And tonight it did. The ambush came without warning. A savage eruption of violence shattered the stillness beyond the castle walls. The night split open with shrieks of warning and the sudden, electrifying hum of unnatural weaponry. Over 100 purifiers, fanatics armed with cutting-edge, energy-draining ammunition, descended upon them like a plague, their formation disciplined, their intent unmistakable: annihilation. The air turned electric with supernatural energy and smoke. Shadows collided with blinding light as chaos unfurled its wings. Alessandro was fury incarnate. He moved like something out of myth, an ancient, unstoppable force, tearing through the enemy ranks with terrifying precision. His speed was blinding, his strikes a blur of bone and blood, his fangs flashing white against the darkness. Every motion was poetry and violence, centuries of predatory instinct made flesh. Beside him, Ingrid was a silver storm. Her blades sang through the air, each arc of her arms a fatal promise. She moved in perfect synchrony with him, her form fluid, deadly, eyes burning with the fire of battle, her instincts locked on him, covering his blind spots before he even needed her to. They moved as one. Their rhythm was unspoken but flawless, a deadly waltz forged in trust and the strange, tender bond that had slowly, inexorably formed between them. Around them, vampires and hybrids joined the clash. Astrid's war cry split the night as she leapt into the fray. Kale fought with a savage grace, their knives spinning silver in the moonlight. The battlefield burned with motion, screams, the sickening crunch of bone and steel. And then, it happened. A purifier, hidden behind the ruined husk of a stone column, leveled a modified weapon straight at Alessandro. A sharp click, a glint of metal, a heartbeat. Ingrid didn't think, she moved. Her body collided with his, shielding him just as the weapon exploded in a volley of specialized rounds. Pain burst through her forearm like wildfire. One of the bullets embedded itself deep in her flesh, its dark magic writhing inside her. A searing, parasitic drain tore through her veins, siphoning her energy, her strength, her very essence. She collapsed to one knee, gasping, the world tilting on its axis. Alessandro's roar shook the night. It wasn't a sound made by any man. It was ancient, primal, filled with a fury so profound it silenced even the chaos of war. In an instant, he was gone from her side, tearing through the shooter like a beast unleashed. Limbs, blood, screams, nothing remained but the echo of wrath. When he returned to her, there was no more hesitation, no more restraint. He became her shield. Each blow he struck now carried the weight of his fear, his rage, his guilt. His movements grew more vicious, more desperate, as if trying to undo what had already been done. Ingrid, weakened but not broken, stayed in the fight, leaning on his strength, refusing to be left behind. Together, they carved a path out of the massacre. When it was over, they were bloodied, bruised, breathless, but alive. Now, in the quiet hush of the castle library, the storm behind them, silence reigned once more. The hearth crackled gently, its golden light dancing over tall bookcases and worn armchairs. Shadows flickered along the stone walls, echoing the violence that still lingered in their bones. Ingrid sat curled in a velvet chair, her jacket blood-stained and tossed aside, her arm cradled close to her chest. The wound still throbbed, a burning, pulsing ache that no salve could numb. The energy-draining bullet had left behind a whisper of darkness, gnawing at her strength. Alessandro was a silent figure kneeling before her. He reached for her arm with slow, reverent care, his fingers wrapping gently around her wrist. The chill of his touch no longer startled her. It was familiar now, even comforting. His brows furrowed as he studied the wound, the muscles in his jaw tight with restraint. "Ingrid," he said softly, voice rough with something more than concern. "You shouldn't have done that." "I had to," she whispered. "I couldn't just watch." He didn't argue. Instead, his gaze darkened, his fangs lengthening ever so slightly, instinct overriding discipline for the briefest of moments. She saw the flicker of hunger in his eyes, ancient and impossible to hide, and something in her chest caught. He drew her arm closer, his face inches from the wound. Ingrid's breath faltered. She felt everything, the heat of the fire behind her, the cold of his breath, the strange intimacy of his proximity. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment, from the unspoken things between them suddenly too loud to ignore. She met his eyes. And what she saw there wasn't hunger. It wasn't even anger. It was something far more dangerous. It was devotion. Raw, unapologetic, terrifying in its clarity. "I won't lose you," he said, his voice barely a murmur. And for once, Ingrid didn't know what to say. He lowers his head, lips barely grazing the edge of her wound, so soft, so fleeting it's almost a whisper against her skin. His breath, cool and deliberate, stirs the fine hairs on her arm, sending an electric shiver rippling through her. He inhales deeply, the sharp, intoxicating scent of her blood flooding his senses like a siren's call, raw and primal. His fangs tremble, hovering just a breath away from her flesh, an inferno of hunger raging within him, desperate to break free. But he doesn't. Ancient willpower, ironclad and relentless, holds him fast. The restraint twists through him like agony, a silent testament to the depths of his control and his devotion. Ingrid's eyes are wide, caught between fear and fascination, watching the storm of hunger wrestle with the fortress of his discipline. The savage desire in his gaze is terrifying, yet beneath it lies something infinitely sweeter, the fierce effort he's making for her. "Alessandro," she breathes, voice trembling, barely more than a prayer, an offering from the deepest corner of her soul. "You may." It's a surrender she never imagined possible, raw, fragile, and utterly profound. He pulls back slowly, his dark eyes, rimmed with the shadow of restraint, locking onto hers. The hunger flickers and fades, replaced by a tenderness so deep it aches. "No," he murmurs, his voice thick with unspent longing and sorrow. "Not now, you're too drained, too broken. I wish," his throat tightens, "I wish I could heal this for you, take away the pain, but not by taking more from you." His words hang heavy between them, a fragile promise wrapped in unyielding strength. This act of restraint is more binding than blood ever could be. His thumb traces a gentle path along her jaw, tilting her face upward until she meets the endless night of his eyes. They hold a tempest of emotion, fierce tenderness, aching desire, and something infinitely vulnerable that steals her breath away. "You are magnificent, Ingrid," he whispers, voice low and husky, a vibration deep in her bones. "So fierce, so brave." Her heart pounds wildly, a frantic drumbeat drowning out the quiet crackle of the fire. All her life, she's built walls, steel and stone around her heart, believing emotions were weaknesses to be hidden, dangers to be avoided. But here, in his gaze, in his touch, in the raw, excruciating strength of his self-control, she feels something she's never known before. Belonging. Connection. A pull so fierce it threatens to shatter every defense she's ever held. He leans in, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, every moment to retreat. She doesn't. Her eyes flutter closed, and when his lips meet hers, it's tentative at first, a fragile exploration. Then hunger ignites, fierce and all-consuming, a kiss forged in shared danger, mutual respect, and a love that defies every ancient grudge that has kept them apart. His lips are soft but commanding, tasting of old wine, midnight, and something uniquely him. Her hands find their way into his dark hair, fingers tangling as she pulls him closer, deepening the kiss, anchoring herself to this burning truth. Outside, the world roars with chaos, war, hatred, fear, but inside this moment, all of it falls away. There is only him, only the warmth of his lips, the strength of his arms, and the fire of a love that promises forever. A promise she is desperate to believe. Chapter 14. A Love Forged in Shadow. In the weeks following their first kiss, Alessandro and Ingrid's relationship blossomed with a depth and intensity that neither had anticipated. What began as a reluctant alliance had grown into something far more powerful, a bond forged not just in blood and fire, but in moments of quiet trust and shared vulnerability. Amid the looming threat of war, they clung to each other like a secret, fierce, and fragile all at once. They found solace in slivers of time, brief touches in shadowed corridors, hushed exchanges beneath the shroud of midnight, where only the ancient stones bore witness. The library became their haven. The same hearth where their lips had first met now glowed with the embers of unspoken words and slow-burning desire. There, amid the scent of old parchment and forgotten tomes, they spoke of things neither had dared admit aloud before, of past regrets and buried hopes, of a future that felt both impossibly distant and achingly close. Alessandro watched her often in those quiet hours, his gaze tender, his posture relaxed in a way few had ever seen. He would reach for a book, letting his fingers brush hers in a fleeting touch that sent shivers up her spine. Once, as she lingered at a shelf lost in thought, he stood silently beside her and murmured, "The weight of the world seems lighter when you are near." His voice was low, reverent, a truth dressed in simplicity. For the first time in centuries, Alessandro felt life stir within the hollow chambers of his heart. The aching void that had long defined his immortality now throbbed with something startling and new joy. Real, unfiltered joy in the curve of her smile, the lilt of her laughter, the fire in her voice when she spoke of unity and peace. "I never thought I could feel this again," he confessed one night as they sat before the dying fire, his fingers tracing slow, thoughtful patterns across her palm. This, lightness, as if centuries of burden have lifted, if only a little. He looked into her eyes, the flicker of flame casting golden shadows across his face. "You remind me what it means to truly live." Her head resting on his shoulder, Ingrid smiled into the hush of the night. In his arms, she had found a strength that went beyond combat or power, a strength that quieted the ceaseless alertness she'd grown used to. For the first time in her life, she wasn't merely surviving. She was being seen, known, understood. "You make me want to believe in tomorrow," she whispered against his throat. "Before you, I lived only for the next threat, the next mission, but now we have something worth fighting for," he finished softly, pressing a kiss to her hair. "Not just survival, but a future." Still, even within the sacred cocoon they'd built, danger loomed. Their love was a secret they guarded with their lives. Were it to be revealed, it could unravel everything. The fragile trust between their peoples, the political balance, the alliance they had fought so hard to form. Centuries of prejudice and bloodshed cast long shadows over their stolen nights. But secrets don't stay hidden forever. The whispers had begun. Servants noted how Alessandro's gaze lingered too long on Ingrid during council meetings. Soldiers remarked on the frequency of their quiet, private exchanges. Rumors fanned through the castle like wind-blown embers, threatening to spark a fire that could consume them both. And beyond Alessandro's lands, darker forces stirred. Isabella's banishment had not extinguished her fury. Shattered pride and festering rage drove her to seek out her sire, Lord Valerius Thorn, the ancient vampire who had always resented Alessandro's progressive ideals. In his fortress of stone and shadow, Valerius listened, his voice as smooth as velvet over razors. "My dear child," he said, embracing her broken pride like a precious weapon, "your pain is my pain, but revenge requires patience. Let time soften their vigilance, and then we strike." Valerius, a master of subterfuge, began spinning his web, courting the discontented, whispering doubts, stoking old fears. Valerius did not rush. He knew Alessandro's greatest vulnerability was not a weakness of skill, but of heart, love. And when that love became exposed, when the right moment came, Valerius would strike, swift and merciless. Back within the castle walls, as external attacks grew bolder and tensions frayed, the fragile intimacy Alessandro and Ingrid had carved out became harder to hold. Their nights were fewer, shorter. Their burdens grew. Deep in the castle's oldest halls, as their whispered vows echoed against stone walls and their hearts beat louder than war drums, neither of them saw the trap already closing in. Their enemies were waiting, watching. And soon, the war for their souls would begin. Chapter 15, Blood and Steel. The ancient castle had transformed over the past 3 days. What had once been Alessandro's private stronghold now housed the largest gathering of supernatural forces in centuries. The courtyards echoed with unfamiliar languages as vampire covens from across Europe mingled uneasily, with hybrid clans from the mountain settlements. Shapeshifter packs had claimed the outer grounds, their territorial instincts making them wary of sleeping under stone roofs. Sophia had worked miracles managing the logistics, feeding vampires who couldn't share blood sources, accommodating shapeshifters who needed space to change, and ensuring the hybrids had access to their preferred weapons and equipment. The castle's ancient walls had witnessed many things, but never an alliance like this. Now, in the war room that had been hastily expanded to accommodate representatives from a dozen different factions, final preparations were being made. Maps covered every surface, marked with attack routes and defensive positions. Alessandro stood at the center of it all, his dark eyes scanning the assembled forces, vampires, hybrids, and shapeshifters who had answered the call despite centuries of mistrust. Ingrid moved through the crowd, checking weapons and coordinating with team leaders. Her silver hair caught the torchlight as she bent over tactical displays with Marcus and Lady Cordelia. When her gaze met Alessandro's across the room, something electric passed between them. "The EMP towers are our primary concern," Cale was saying, pointing to the fortress schematics. "Once those go down, their automated defenses become manageable." "My wolves can take the eastern perimeter," Marcus growled. "We'll draw their attention while the vampires hit from the north." Alessandro stepped forward. "Ingrid and I will take the central approach. We'll be the hammer they focus on while you dismantle their defenses." A moment of silence fell. Everyone understood what that meant. They would face the heaviest fire, the most dangerous weapons. "That's suicide," Astrid said bluntly. Ingrid's voice was steady. "It's necessary." The pre-dawn air was sharp with frost as they took their positions. Alessandro adjusted his sword belt, the familiar weight of his blade a comfort against what lay ahead. Beside him, Ingrid checked her twin daggers one final time. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her blue eyes hard as winter steel. "Let's end this." The first explosions lit up the valley as their allies struck the outer defenses. Shapeshifters in wolf form tore through the eastern fence line, while vampires materialized like smoke among the northern guard towers. The Purifier compound erupted into chaos, klaxons wailing as soldiers rushed to defensive positions. Alessandro and Ingrid moved down the central slope, their supernatural speed turning the rocky terrain into a blur. Motion sensors triggered as they hit the killing field, automated turrets swiveling to track their approach. The first wave of silver-laced bullets forced them to separate, each drawing fire in different directions. Alessandro rolled behind a concrete barrier as projectiles chewed chunks from the reinforcement. To his left, Ingrid vaulted over a spray of gunfire, her hybrid agility carrying her behind an abandoned vehicle. "Two hostiles on central approach," crackled a voice over Purifier communications. "Initiating heavy weapons protocol." The EMP cannon's distinctive hum filled the air. Alessandro felt the familiar drain immediately, his supernatural strength flickering like a dying flame. Across the battlefield, he saw Ingrid stumble as the electromagnetic pulse washed over her. But she kept moving. Gritting her teeth against the weakness, she forced herself forward through raw determination. The pulse should have dropped her, but hybrid resilience and pure fury carried her past the weapon's effective range. Alessandro pushed through his own weakness, centuries of accumulated power allowing him to function even under the electromagnetic assault. Together, they closed the distance to the fortress walls. "Breach charges now," a Purifier commander shouted. The wall exploded outward in a shower of concrete and steel. Through the smoke came elite Purifier soldiers in full combat gear, their weapons gleaming with blessed silver and sanctified metal. The battle became a dance of death. Alessandro's sword sang through the air, its ancient steel parting modern armor like silk. Beside him, Ingrid's daggers found the gaps in enemy defenses with surgical precision. They moved as one entity, each covering the other's attacks, their fighting styles complementing perfectly despite having trained together for only weeks. A Purifier raised a blessed silver launcher toward Alessandro's back. Ingrid was there instantly, her dagger finding the soldier's throat before the weapon could discharge. When 3 more tried to flank her with sanctified blades, Alessandro appeared among them like death incarnate. "Command center, 2nd level," Ingrid called out over the chaos, pointing toward the fortress's heart. They fought their way through corridors filled with desperate defenders. Each room was a new battleground, each corner potentially hiding death. But nothing could stop them now, not blessed weapons, not sanctified barriers, not the best training the Purifiers could provide. In the central command chamber, they found their prize. Commander Harrison stood behind his final line of defense, elite soldiers with the kind of equipment that had slaughtered countless supernatural beings. "You want to know what abominations look like?" Harrison snarled, raising a weapon that hummed with malevolent energy. "Look in a mirror." "Noted," Alessandro replied, his voice conversational despite the blood on his armor. The final fight was brutal, but brief. Harrison's elite guard fell to supernatural fury that had been honed over centuries. The commander himself lasted only seconds longer, his experimental weapons useless against opponents who moved like liquid shadow. When silence fell, Alessandro and Ingrid stood among the wreckage, breathing hard. Around them, the sounds of battle were fading as their allies secured the rest of the fortress. "Status report," Ingrid spoke into her communicator. "Eastern perimeter secured," came Marcus's voice. "North towers down," Lady Cordelia reported. "Power grid offline," Elena confirmed. "All defensive systems neutralized." Alessandro wiped his blade clean, the gesture automatic after centuries of warfare. "One down. How many more cells do we estimate?" "Intelligence suggests at least 12 major installations," Ingrid replied, checking her daggers for damage. This was just the beginning. They stood close together in the ruined command center, not touching but somehow connected by shared purpose and hard-won trust. Outside, the sun was rising over their first real victory. "Back to the castle," Alessandro asked. Ingrid nodded. "We need to plan the next strike while they're still reeling." As they walked through the conquered fortress, stepping over the bodies of those who had hunted their kind for so long, neither spoke of what had passed between them in the heat of battle. The way they had moved as one. The perfect synchronization of their attacks. The absolute trust required to fight back-to-back against overwhelming odds. Some things didn't need words. The war was far from over, but today they had proven something important. Separately they were dangerous, but together they were unstoppable. And their enemies were beginning to understand exactly what they were facing. Chapter 16, The Price of Love. 3 weeks had passed since the fortress fell. The Alliance had struck 2 more Purifier installations with devastating efficiency, their coordination improving with each battle. But success bred complacency, and complacency was a luxury they couldn't afford. Alessandro stood in the castle's highest tower, watching the sun set over the Carpathian peaks. The latest intelligence reports lay scattered across his desk, 12 more Purifier cells identified, their locations mapped, their weaknesses analyzed. They were winning this war, but victory felt hollow when measured against the cost. "You're brooding again," Ingrid observed from the doorway, her armor still bearing scorch marks from their latest raid. "Thinking," he corrected, though his slight smile acknowledged her point. "Our enemies aren't sitting idle while we celebrate our victories." She crossed to stand beside him at the window. Marcus's scouts found another installation near Prague, larger than the others, heavily fortified. "I know, Elena's team confirmed it yesterday." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "They're consolidating their remaining forces, making a stand." "Then we hit them before they're ready." "We will, but not tonight." He turned to face her fully. "Tonight we rest, tomorrow we plan, the day after we strike." Ingrid studied his face in the dying light. 3 weeks of constant warfare had taken their toll. Even supernatural stamina had limits. "When did you last feed properly?" The question was practical, not accusatory. She'd learned to read the subtle signs of his hunger, the way his movements became more controlled when his strength ebbed. "I'll hunt later," he said dismissively. "Alessandro," her voice carried the tone she used when coordinating battle plans, calm, measured, brooking no argument. "Feed, now, that's not a request." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "Giving me orders in my own castle." "Someone has to. You're too stubborn to take care of yourself properly." Before he could respond, a commotion echoed from the courtyard below. Shouts in multiple languages, the clash of weapons, the howl of a shapeshifter in distress. Alessandro was moving before his conscious mind processed the sounds, Ingrid beside him as they raced down the stone steps. The great hall was chaos. Bodies lay scattered across the ancient stones, some of their allied vampires, recognizable despite the massive trauma that had killed them. In the center of the carnage stood two figures that made Alessandro's blood freeze in his veins. Lord Valerius Thorn had somehow penetrated their defenses, his ancient power radiating through the hall like a physical force. Beside him, Isabella Morau's eyes burned with vindictive satisfaction as she surveyed the destruction they had wrought. "Alessandro," Valeria said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "Still collecting strays, I see." Alessandro stepped forward, placing himself between the ancient vampire and Ingrid. "Valerius, should have known you'd crawl out of whatever hole you've been hiding in." "Hiding?" Valerius's smile was razor-thin. "I've been watching, waiting. Your little alliance has been quite entertaining." "Get to the point." "The point is that you've forgotten your place, forgotten what we are." Valerius's gaze shifted to Ingrid with open disgust. "Consorting with hybrids like some common sellsword." Alessandro's jaw tightened. "My alliances are my concern. Not when they threaten the natural order, not when they make us all look weak." The attack came without warning. Valerius moved with speed that blurred even to supernatural senses, crossing the hall in an instant. But he didn't strike at Alessandro directly. Instead, his hand closed around the throat of Marcus, who had been trying to rally the surviving shapeshifters. "Stop!" The word tore from Alessandro's throat as Valerius lifted the alpha off his feet. "Ah, there's the compassion I remember," Valerius mused, his grip tightening. "The weakness that makes you predictable." "Let him go. Your quarrel is with me." "My quarrel is with what you've become. This pathetic alliance, this corruption of vampire purity." Valerius's free hand gestured toward where Ingrid stood, daggers drawn. "Consorting with hybrids like some common." The insult never finished. Alessandro's fury exploded outward in a wave of supernatural force that sent Isabella stumbling backward. But Valerius was ready for it, his own power meeting Alessandro's in a collision that shattered windows and cracked stone walls. The battle that followed was like nothing the Great Hall had ever witnessed. Two ancient vampires unleashed centuries of accumulated power, their conflict turning the air itself into something dangerous. Furniture disintegrated under the force of their blows. Portraits of Alessandro's ancestors burst into flame from the sheer heat of their supernatural energies. But Alessandro was outnumbered. Isabella circled like a predator, striking at his flanks whenever Valerius's assault created openings. And worse, he was fighting defensively, trying to protect the surviving allies who couldn't escape the hall fast enough. All around them, chaos reigned. Ingrid fought furiously against the swarm of lesser vampires that had arrived with Valerius and Isabella. There were too many of them, and they were relentless, their eyes glowing with bloodlust. Her blade flashed with precision and fury, felling one after another, but for every vampire that dropped, two more took its place. She could barely spare a glance toward Alessandro, but her heart twisted with dread every time his grunts of exertion or pain pierced the din of battle. Valerius sensed the weakness and exploited it ruthlessly. When Alessandro moved to shield Astrid from Isabella's claws, the ancient vampire struck with surgical precision. His hand, moving faster than thought, punched through Alessandro's chest and emerged from his back in a spray of dark blood. The world stopped. Ingrid turned just in time to see Valerius's hand disappear into Alessandro's chest. She froze, mid-swing, mid-breath, as the shock and pain contorted his face, and a crimson spray painted the ancient stones. For a moment that lasted an eternity, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the man who had become her entire world being torn apart before her eyes. No, she whispered, the word barely audible. Then louder, Rower. No. Valerius's fingers closed around Alessandro's heart, squeezing just enough to send agony through his entire body. I could end you now, he whispered, his voice intimate and terrible. But death would be too kind. You'll watch your precious alliance crumble, watch your hybrid whore die, and then, when you've lost everything that matters, I'll grant you the peace of oblivion. Alessandro's knees buckled, his face going ashen as Valerius's grip tightened around his heart. His eyes found Ingrid's across the chaos, and in them she saw something that shattered her completely, not pain, not fear, but an apology. He thought he was dying. He thought he was leaving her. Something inside Ingrid broke. Not just broke, it exploded. Every wall she'd built, every control she'd maintained, every careful balance between her human heart and supernatural nature was obliterated in an instant. The grief hit her first, a tsunami of loss so profound it felt like drowning. Then came the rage, pure and incandescent, burning away everything that wasn't fury and love, and the absolute, unbreakable certainty that she would not let him die. You want to see an abomination? She screamed, her voice cracking with emotions too big for her throat to contain. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes burned with something beyond human rage. You want to see what happens when you try to take away the only thing that matters to me? She moved toward Isabella with inhuman speed, but this wasn't the calculated grace of a trained fighter. This was something wild and primal, grief and fury given form. Her daggers found flesh again and again, but when Isabella's vampire healing closed the wounds, Ingrid's sobs of frustration echoed through the hall. He's dying, she gasped between strikes, her voice breaking. He's dying and I can't. The daggers fell from her hands. I won't let him die, she whispered, and her voice carried a finality that made even Valerius pause. I won't lose him, not ever. What happened next defied every law of supernatural combat. Ingrid's bare hands found Isabella's throat, and the vampire's mocking laughter turned to choking gasps. But this wasn't about strength or speed or technique. This was about will, the absolute, unshakable will of someone who had found their reason for existing and would let nothing, stand in the way of protecting it. Isabella's eyes went wide with terror as she realized she couldn't break free, couldn't heal fast enough, couldn't do anything but die. The hybrid's grief-fueled rage had transcended the physical, becoming something that simply refused to be denied. Impossible, Valerius breathed, his grip on Alessandro's heart loosening in shock. It was the opening Alessandro needed. Despite the agony, despite the weakness flooding through him, he found the strength to act. His hand shot up, closing around Valerius's throat. You made one mistake, he gasped. Valerius tried to pull away, but Alessandro's grip was absolute. They stood locked together, each trying to crush the other's throat, Valerius's hand still buried in Alessandro's chest. You cannot defeat me, Valerius gasped, his grip tightening on Alessandro's heart. I've had centuries more than you to perfect my strength. Maybe, Alessandro replied through gritted teeth, his vision blurring but his resolve unwavering. But I have something you don't. I have someone who loves me enough to move mountains. The sound of Isabella's neck snapping echoed through the hall like a gunshot. She fell to the ancient stones, her beautiful face frozen in an expression of disbelief. Beside her, Ingrid collapsed to her knees, her hands covered in blood that wasn't her own, her whole body shaking with the aftermath of emotions too powerful to contain. Valerius's roar of fury shook the entire castle. His rage made him careless, and Alessandro was ready for it. 5 centuries of experience, 5 centuries of accumulated strength, and most importantly, the knowledge that someone was willing to break themselves apart to save him. The end came suddenly. Alessandro's free hand found the ancient wooden stake at his belt, the same weapon that had belonged to his mortal father, blessed by priests who had died many centuries ago. He drove it home with all his remaining strength, piercing Valerius's heart even as the ancient vampire's claws tore deeper into his own chest. Valerius's eyes went wide, then empty. The ancient vampire crumbled. Alessandro collapsed to his knees, Valerius's hand crumbling to dust but leaving the wound behind. The damage was catastrophic. Even vampire healing struggled with trauma to the heart itself. Dark blood pooled beneath him as his vision blurred. Through the haze of pain, he heard Ingrid's broken sob. "Alessandro, please stay with me," she whispered, her hands hovering over his chest, shaking too hard to be steady. "Please don't leave me. I can't do this without you." The raw desperation in her voice cut through his weakness better than any stimulant. He forced his eyes to focus on her face, saw the tear tracks on her cheeks, the way her lips trembled as she fought to stay in control. "I'm not going anywhere," he managed, though his voice was barely a whisper. "Takes more than that to get rid of me." Her laugh was half sob. "Don't joke, not now, you almost." She couldn't finish the sentence. "But I didn't," he said, lifting one hand to touch her face. "And I won't. I promise you, Ingrid, I'm not leaving you." She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing as fresh tears spilled over. "I thought I'd lost you. For a moment I thought you were gone and she shuddered. "I've never been that afraid in my life." "I know," his thumb brushed away her tears. "I felt it." Slowly, carefully, she helped him sit up, her arms supporting his back. The wound was healing now, his supernatural nature finally winning against the trauma. But they both knew how close it had been. "Can you stand?" she asked, her voice still unsteady. "Give me a minute." He looked around the destroyed hall, taking in the casualties. "How many did we lose?" "Too many." Her voice was flat now, the emotion locked away again. "But it's over. They're both dead." Alessandro nodded, then looked at her properly. Blood stained her hands and clothes, but he could see she wasn't physically hurt. The damage was deeper than that, in her eyes, in the way she held herself like something precious that had almost shattered. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She was quiet for a long moment. "I killed her with my bare hands," she said finally. "You did what you had to do," he said firmly. "We both did, and I'm alive because of it." "I don't know what I would have done if—" She stopped, shaking her head. "I don't want to know." Around them, the great hall was silent except for the quiet movements of survivors checking on the wounded. The immediate threat was over, but the cost had been high. Too high. "We need to secure the perimeter," he said, falling back into command mode. "Make sure they didn't bring reinforcements." "Already handled," Marcus said, approaching with a limp but alive. "My scouts found their entry point. They came alone." Alessandro nodded, then looked around the destroyed hall one more time. "Clean this up, honor our dead, and double the watch rotations." "What about Prague?" Ingrid asked, her voice steadier now but still carrying an edge of fragility. "The installation Alina's team found." "We hit it tomorrow as planned." His voice was steady, but there was something harder in his eyes now, and something infinitely more protective in the way he stayed close to her side. "But first, we make sure this never happens again." In the aftermath of violence, with their enemies finally dead and their alliance still intact, they began the work of rebuilding. Because that's what survivors did. They picked up the pieces and kept moving forward, no matter the cost. But now they both understood exactly what that cost might be, and exactly how much they were willing to sacrifice to protect what they'd found in each other. Chapter 17. Blood and Bonds. The Prague installation had fallen last week, but the victory felt different from the others. More complete, more final. Alessandro stood at the edge of the castle's battlements, watching the first light of dawn paint the Carpathian peaks in shades of gold and crimson. The irony wasn't lost on him, a creature of darkness finding beauty in the sunrise. But then, everything about his existence had become beautifully contradictory since Ingrid had entered his life. "The scouts returned," she said, joining him at the wall. Even after everything they'd been through, her presence still sent a quiet thrill through him. No signs of organized purifier activity anywhere in the region. The cells we missed are scattered, leaderless. "They'll regroup eventually," Alessandro replied, though without his usual edge of concern. "Find new leaders, new purpose." "Eventually." She moved closer, her shoulder brushing his. "But not today, maybe not for years." "And when they do?" Ingrid's smile was fierce and certain. "When they do, we'll be ready, all of us." The alliance had proven stronger than any of them had dared hope. What had begun as a desperate cooperation between natural enemies had evolved into something unprecedented, a true supernatural coalition. Vampires, shapeshifters, and hybrids working not just in harmony, but in genuine partnership. Marcus is already talking about establishing permanent communication networks, Ingrid continued. Elena wants to create joint training programs. Even Astrid has ideas about intelligence sharing between the covens. Alessandro nodded, but his attention was increasingly focused on the woman beside him. The morning light caught the copper highlights in her blonde hair, made her skin glow with warmth that his own would never possess. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was alive in a way that made his centuries of existence feel worthwhile. "You're staring," she observed, though her tone suggested she didn't mind. "I'm appreciating," he corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" She turned to face him fully, and he saw something new in her eyes. Not just affection or desire, but a deeper contentment. Peace, perhaps, for the first time since he'd known her. "The nightmares have stopped," she said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "Good." He'd noticed she'd been sleeping more soundly, no longer jerking awake with memories of battles and loss. "You deserve rest." "We both do." Her hand found his, fingers intertwining naturally. "When did you last truly rest, Alessandro? Not just sleep, but actually let yourself be at peace." The question caught him off guard. He tried to remember the last time he'd felt truly safe, truly content, and realized the answer was both recent and distant. Recent because every moment with her carried that sense of rightness. Distant because before her, he couldn't remember ever feeling this way. "I think," he said slowly, "I'm learning what peace feels like." Her smile was radiant. "Good, because I have no intention of letting you forget." The conversation was interrupted by footsteps on the battlements. Silas approached, his expression carefully neutral in the way that meant he was trying not to intrude on a private moment. "The last of the Prague documents have been translated," he reported. "Nothing we didn't already know. The Purifiers were definitely planning something larger, but with their command structure destroyed." "They're no longer a coordinated threat," Alessandro finished. "Scattered remnants we can handle as they arise." "Exactly." Silas hesitated, then continued. "The Alliance leaders are asking about next steps, whether we maintain the current structure or—" "We maintain it," Ingrid said firmly. "Not just for future threats, but because what we've built here is worth preserving. The cooperation, the understanding, it's bigger than just fighting Purifiers." Alessandro nodded his agreement. "Schedule a formal meeting for tomorrow. We'll discuss making this permanent." Silas left them alone again, and for a while they stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher. "Let's go inside," he said finally. "Let's stay a little longer," Ingrid said, her grip on his hand tightening. "Please." Something in her voice made him look at her more carefully. There was a tension in her posture, a nervousness that hadn't been there moments before. "What is it?" She was quiet for a long moment, then turned to face him fully. "I've been thinking about what happened in the Great Hall, when I thought you were dying." Alessandro's jaw tightened. They'd talked about that night, but he knew it still haunted her, the loss of control, the violence she'd unleashed. "Ingrid." "No, let me finish." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I've been thinking about how I felt in that moment, the desperation, the fear of losing you, and I realized something." She paused, gathering courage. "I love you, Alessandro, not just attraction or affection or partnership. I love you with everything I am, and I want—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "I want to be closer to you, in every way possible." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Alessandro felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight. "Ingrid," he said carefully, "you know what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." Her eyes met his steadily. "I want to share everything with you. I want there to be no barriers between us, none at all." The invitation was clear, but Alessandro found himself hesitating. Not from lack of desire, The need to be close to her, to taste her, to bond with her in the most intimate way possible was a constant ache. But the act of feeding from someone he loved was different from simple sustenance. It was sacred, irreversible, a connection that would bind them together forever. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we cross that line." "There's no going back," she finished. "I know, that's what I want, Alessandro, no going back. No barriers, no holding back." The sun was climbing higher, its rays growing stronger. With visible reluctance, Alessandro stepped back from the wall. "Tonight," he said, his voice rough with promise. "Come to my chambers tonight." Her smile was answer enough. Alessandro's chambers were a study in contradictions. Ancient tapestries hung beside modern art, medieval furniture shared space with contemporary conveniences. But tonight, the room felt different. Expectant, charged with the energy of a moment that would change everything. Ingrid entered without knocking, as she had earned the right to do. She'd changed from her usual practical clothing into something softer, a deep blue dress that complemented her eyes and moved like water around her curves. Her hair was loose, falling in waves around her shoulders. "You look beautiful," Alessandro said, and meant it completely. "So do you." Her gaze traveled over him appreciatively. He'd foregone his usual formal attire for simple black clothing that somehow made him look more dangerous and more approachable at the same time. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the weight of the moment settling between them. Then Ingrid stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume, feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I'm nervous," she admitted quietly. "So am I," he replied, surprising them both. But you've done this before." "Not like this." His hand came up to cup her face gently. "Never like this, never with someone I love." The word hung between them, finally spoken aloud. Alessandro had felt it for months, but hearing himself say it made it real in a way that stole his breath. "I love you too," Ingrid whispered, leaning into his touch. "More than I thought possible." The kiss that followed was different from all the others. Deeper, more urgent, filled with the promise of something neither of them could fully name. Alessandro's hands slipped into her hair while hers gripped the front of his shirt, pulling him closer, as if proximity could quiet the storm of emotion between them. When they finally pulled apart, breathless and shaken, he searched her eyes. "Are you sure?" he asked softly, giving her one last chance to walk away. Instead of answering, Ingrid reached for the buttons of his shirt, her hands steady. Alessandro caught them gently, stilling her. "This isn't just about tonight," he said, voice low and serious. "When I feed from you, it'll create a bond, something permanent. You'll feel what I feel. A part of me will stay with you always." She nodded without hesitation. "Good." That one word unraveled whatever restraint he had left. With reverent hands, he helped her out of her clothes, treating each moment like a vow. She did the same, fingertips brushing over scars earned across centuries, lingering on them with silent promises of healing and understanding. When there were no more barriers between them, Alessandro lifted her, carrying her to the large bed that had long been his only refuge. But as he laid her gently among the dark silk sheets, he knew solitude would never find him again. "Tell me what you want," he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Everything," she said, her eyes steady on his. Their bodies met in a quiet storm of need and tenderness, each touch layered with meaning, each kiss echoing the depth of their bond. Alessandro moved with a kind of worship, memorizing every curve and breath, while Ingrid responded with equal intensity, their connection growing deeper with every heartbeat. As the moments built toward something inevitable, Alessandro stilled, a familiar hunger rising within him, one that was more than physical. "Ingrid," he murmured, his voice strained. "I need." "Yes," she said, already knowing. She tilted her head, offering herself freely. He hesitated only a moment, moved by the trust in her eyes. "It might hurt," he warned gently, his fangs emerging. "I trust you," she said, and the weight of those words nearly broke him. With infinite care, he lowered his head to her throat. When his fangs broke skin, it was as if the world shifted. At once, they were no longer two separate souls, but one, intertwined and inseparable. Her blood was unlike anything he had ever tasted. It carried her strength, her fears, her love, so bright, so fierce. Through it, he could feel her emotions crashing into him like waves: love, vulnerability, hope. And she felt his in return centuries of solitude, suddenly replaced by the certainty of her. Ingrid gasped, the brief pain dissolving into something more profound. Her hand found his, and she held on tightly, not out of fear, but out of wonder. "Alessandro," she breathed, her hands fisting in his hair, holding him to her throat. He took only what he needed, sealing the wounds with his tongue before lifting his head to look at her. Her eyes were glazed with pleasure and wonder, her cheeks flushed with warmth. "How do you feel?" he asked, his own voice rough with emotion. "Complete," she said simply. "Like a part of me I didn't know was missing has finally been found." The bond between them was immediate and profound. Alessandro could feel her heartbeat as if it were his own, could sense her emotions like a constant warm presence in his mind. And she, in turn, felt his ancient strength flowing through her, his centuries of knowledge and experience becoming part of her own understanding. "Is it always like this?" she asked, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "No," he said honestly. "Never like this. What we have is extraordinary, Ingrid, unprecedented." She smiled, pulling him down for another kiss. "Then we'll have to figure it out together." "Together," he agreed, and the word carried the weight of forever. They made love again, slower this time, savoring each sensation, each moment of connection. The bond between them amplified everything: pleasure, emotion, the simple joy of being together. When they finally collapsed into each other's arms, both were changed in ways that went far beyond the physical. "What happens now?" Ingrid asked, her head pillowed on Alessandro's chest. "Now we face whatever comes," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "The Purifiers will reorganize eventually. New threats will emerge. The Alliance will face challenges we can't imagine. But we'll face them together." "Together," he confirmed, "always together." Outside, the night was deep and still, the castle quiet around them. But inside Alessandro's chambers, two souls who had found their perfect match in each other planned for a future that would be anything but quiet. There would be battles to fight, enemies to face, an alliance to maintain and strengthen. But they would meet every challenge the same way they had met each other, with courage, with love, and with the unshakable knowledge that together they could overcome anything. The supernatural world was changing, and they would be at the center of that change. Not as ruler and subject, not as allies of convenience, but as partners in every sense of the word. Equal, bonded, and utterly devoted to each other and the cause they had chosen to serve. As dawn approached, they lay entwined in the oak bed, their bond settling into something as natural as breathing. The future was uncertain, but their love was absolute. And in a world of darkness and danger, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.